41. Being taunted by guards. Tony started to read the statement Pepper had prepared for him. All he really had to do was say the words. The reporters gathered below showed no shock. They'd already heard the story from other sources. Pepper's script made no mention of Decepticons, so when Tony finished those lines, he folded it and slipped it into his pocket. He glanced at the other sheet Coulson had handed him, frowned, and continued in a drier tone. The second item, regarding the robots that caused a disturbance in Manhattan the day before yesterday, the report claims those robots were stolen by terrorists from the government with the intent to overthrow the world. Frankly, that sounds absurd. How could the government possibly possess such advanced robots? For the record, this was passed to me by an agent of a secret organization. I won't name them. It's a long, tedious title, the kind of thing you'd see in a White House memo, and I don't think anyone cares to hear it. The reporters erupted into laughter, but Coulson's face hardened beneath them. He had the sinking feeling that this was about to go badly. "We'll get to that later," Tony said. "First, I want to clear something up. Some of you think I once fought robots in Iron Man armor, and that makes me some kind of Iron Man. Everyone here knows I'm a playboy. A playboy going out to fight in armor. That just doesn't sound right." The flashes slowed as the reporters leaned in, waiting for the next line. "So here's the truth. I am Iron Man." He punctuated the confession with a slight flick of his left hand. Jarvis, hovering nearby, registered the signal and streaked toward him. The suit unfolded and locked around Tony in an instant. Cameras erupted in a blinding strobe. The reflected metal from the armor ricocheted the light back at the room and made it hard for anyone to keep their eyes open. Mr. Stark. The questions came tumbling out again, desperate and incredulous. A playboy becoming a superhero, this was headline news on the scale of the Manhattan invasion. Coulson pressed a hand to his face. Stark had just blown the lid off his own life, classic Stark, but at least he hadn't let anything slip about the Decepticons or Autobots. "Everyone, please, quiet down. I'll introduce another friend to you. He will explain the truth of the matter. Look to our right. Please welcome Optimus Prime to the stage." Agent Coulson reflexively plucked a strand of hair between his fingers. He'd known this could go badly. The worst was about to happen. The red and blue truck that had been parked beside the press area began to shift. Metal groaned and clashed as panels slid and pistons snapped into place. Where the truck had been, a towering mechanical figure unfolded and stood fully upright. Huge, noble, unmistakable. "Hello, everyone," the robot's voice boomed. "I am Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots." At the sight of such an enormous living machine, the reporters instinctively took a step back, some 2 or 3, cameras bobbing as they retreated. Then a sharp-eyed reporter squinted at the newcomer and said hesitantly, "Isn't that the robot who stood with Tony Stark on the Brooklyn Bridge that day?" That name, and that memory, spread like wildfire. Faces that had been frightened a moment before now registered recognition. The others remembered the feeds of machines threatening the city and how that same robot had helped drive them off. In an instant, the fear turned into a feeding frenzy. Microphones thrust forward, cameras clicked and whirred, and the press closed in. A burly reporter pushed through the crowd, shoulder to shoulder, until he reached the metal behemoth's feet and barked, "Mr. Big Robot, your name is Optimus Prime, right?" "Are you the latest model of robot?" a reporter called out. Optimus Prime regarded the room with calm intensity and answered in his deep, authoritative voice. "No, we Autobots are sentient beings, just like humans. The difference is only where we were made. You were born on Earth. We come from Cybertron. Cybertron is our homeworld." Before anyone could follow up, another reporter shouted, "So you're aliens then? What about the robots that destroyed the city and fought you? Are they aliens too? Why did they destroy the city? Do they come from Cybertron as well?" Optimus's tone remained steady. "They are Decepticons, a rogue faction from Cybertron that thrives on war and conquest. When we discovered they had come to Earth, we followed to help you in this crisis." A hand shot up. "Then why would you Cybertronians?" "Okay, gentlemen," Tony Stark cut in, drawing every eye. "Don't forget who this press conference is for. This is a Stark Industries briefing. If you want more detailed information, contact the appropriate departments at Stark Industries." Right now, I'm the one in charge of receiving our alien guests." The announcement hit the world like an explosion. Even the officials who already knew about the Autobots and Decepticons were stunned, because Tony Stark had made it public himself. Aliens existed, and they weren't anything like the soft-bodied creatures people imagined. They were mechanical life forms, silicon-based intelligence. It was a scientific and cultural earthquake, and Tony was at the center of it. He had openly confirmed his identity as a superhero, and he had become the primary human liaison to the Autobots. That status was unmistakable. Stark Industries' stock took off, quickly burying the old records from before Tony's disappearance, and the climb showed no sign of slowing. Now, Iron Man, the focus of a planet, was escorting his assistant Pepper Potts and Jarvis into the grand ballroom. He was there to finalize a collaboration with the other party, an agreement that had been struck when Pepper first discovered the visitor and brought him back from Afghanistan. Today, the long-promised meeting was finally going to happen. Tony hadn't brought his usual bodyguard, Happy. He figured he didn't need one anymore. With Jarvis running point, he could suit up at a moment's notice. If Jarvis couldn't handle a problem, Happy wouldn't make a difference anyway, so Tony had reassigned him as his driver. When Tony pulled up to the entrance of the different ballroom, he ran straight into the dress code issue Pepper had warned him about. No monocle, no entry. As predictable as it was, Tony had no intention of following somebody else's rules. Two doormen stepped forward and held up their hands to block him. Tony arched an eyebrow and took a small step back so they couldn't touch him. "You've got nerve," he said. "Don't you know who I am? I'm here to discuss a collaboration with your boss." He reached up, slid off his sunglasses, and tucked them into his breast pocket, letting his well-known face be seen. One of the guards adjusted his monocle, clapped a hand to his stomach, and jabbed a finger at Tony as if to signal silent laughter. "Look at him," he mouthed. The other guard did the same, tugged his monocle into place, smirked, and crossed his arms, enjoying the spectacle. Tony felt the mockery like a physical shove. Pride flared up inside him. Pepper stepped forward, trying to calm him, but Tony lifted a hand to stop her. "Pepper, leave it," he said. "There isn't a place in the world Tony Stark can't get into. Jarvis, let's go in. P.S. Recommendation, Marvel Reaper. It summons Makima at the start. Check it out on the author's page." 42. Weird stairs. Tony, Jay humming in his ear, strode straight for the staircase, ignoring the guards flanking either side. The guards made no move to stop him. Seeing that, Tony shot a triumphant grin back at Pepper. "Pepper, see? They're all bark and no bite. Stand your ground and nobody can touch you." He climbed 1 step, 2, 3, 4. By the 5th step, something felt wrong. The staircase only had 3 tiers, so why had he taken 5 steps and still not reached the top? He glanced up, and the landing was still the same distance away. When he looked back down, the steps kept repeating beneath his feet. The same lower tiers still lay behind him. Turning around, he realized he was still standing on the very first tier. The 2 guards watched him with mocking looks, as if daring him. Look, he can't even climb the stairs. Tony's smile tightened. He figured it out. The steps under his feet were being driven backward as he moved forward, controlled somehow by those 2 guards. A trick, but not one that would beat him. "These cheap tricks won't work on me," he muttered, then took a long, decisive stride and landed squarely on the topmost step. This time, he planted his feet and looked again, only to find, to his shock, that he was back at the very bottom of the staircase, not even a single step higher. He wanted to take a few paces back to inspect the strange mechanism and find its flaw, but the moment he stepped backward, his foot hit nothing. It felt like stepping off into thin air, as if there were no staircase behind him at all. His arms flew out instinctively to catch his balance, but he was too slow and nearly pitched backward. If he'd fallen hard, his tailbone would have taken the worst of it. Fortunately, Jarvis had been tracking him the whole time. The system reacted instantly and steadied him before he could hit the floor. "Oh, shit! What kind of stairs are these?" Tony cursed under his breath, genuinely shaken. Pepper hurried over, worry clear in her voice. "Tony, are you okay?" She hadn't followed him upstairs, so she'd been watching from below. From her angle, it looked like he kept walking up the stairs but never actually got any higher. as if someone had paused time and put him back down on the same step. No one was trying to be clever and pause time to move the stairs. This was just the way the entrance worked. The steps slid in a continuous loop, folding forwards and backwards into each other so that the geometry kept shifting. Only people wearing a monocle could ignore the motion and walk normally. Tony and his group were stalled on the lower landing when the sound of tires skidding reached them, followed by the satisfying mechanical whir of a robot transforming. A blonde girl strode past Tony, Liana, accompanied by the dry click of her tongue, a small, obvious taunt at his inability to make it up the stairs. Behind her, a mature woman in a black dress moved like a bodyguard, falling in step with Liana. To Tony's humiliation, the two of them simply walked straight into the different ballroom as if the stairs didn't exist. They weren't wearing monocles either. Tony wanted to sink into the floor. If he could have made himself small enough to crawl into a crack, he would have. Feeling singled out and furious, he called after them. Hey, why don't they need to wear monocles? Are you being sexist? Tony felt as if he'd walked into an invisible wall. He couldn't get up the steps, while the two women strolled past the guards as if they owned the place. The guards grinned. One of them said, with a hint of smugness, "She's the big boss's sister. Of course she gets in. You, though? Sk. That's blatant favoritism. I'm not going into this circus," Tony snapped. "Pepper, let's go. I'm done with this so-called cooperation." He turned and started to walk away, not really because of the words, but because he'd been put on the spot and didn't want to stand there and lose face. Pepper, who knew him well, rolled her eyes and tugged him back. "Tony, don't be ridiculous. We finally have Tim. Ida, come here. Do you want all the work I've been doing to be for nothing? And remember, it was their people who rescued you in Afghanistan." Tony hesitated when he saw the faint resentment in her eyes. Before he could answer, Jarvis's calm voice chimed in beside him. "Sir, we've identified the two women who just entered. The younger woman was the one who raced you on the motorcycle. The woman accompanying her is in fact the motorcycle. She's a transformer as well." "According to the data, that girl is a mutant," Jarvis said. "She used her mutant abilities to fight the Decepticons during the invasion." Tony stared, disbelief written all over his face. "What? That beautiful woman is a transformer too? Jarvis, you're not joking, are you?" Jarvis didn't answer with words. He extended a hand and projected the recording into the air, the footage of Liana pulling up behind them earlier. They watched her lock the brakes, drift the bike to a stop, and slide off with effortless grace. In an instant, the silver motorcycle folded and shimmered, resolving into a black-haired grown woman. Tony whistled. "No kidding, a transformer that can take human form." A grin flickered across Tony's face. "Hey, Jarvis, can you transform?" There was a small mechanical twitch in Jarvis's voice. "Sir, I cannot transform into a beautiful woman." Tony laughed, half offended. "Jarvis, do you have me down in your files as a man who only notices pretty faces?" "Sir," Jarvis replied dryly, "that is not merely an impression. That is who you are." "You wound me," Tony said, mock hurt. As the words left his mouth, the mechanical veneer of Jarvis's housing began to shift and slide, the panels whispering across each other as something in the lab prepared to change. The mechanical facade melted away, revealing an adult man with light hair and sharply defined features. "It really works," Jarvis said. Tony gave him a once-over and decided the new appearance was acceptable. Pepper watched, still wide-eyed. Jarvis becoming a robot had been astonishing enough. Now that he could assume a human form, the world seemed even more magical to her. She pushed the wonder aside. There was business to attend to. "All right, Tony, we should go in. Here, take this." Pepper pulled 2 monocles from her pocket and handed one to him. She'd known her boss would never come prepared, so she had, as any competent secretary would, brought spares. "Fine, I'll reluctantly go in," Tony announced with mock dignity. He took the monocle from Pepper and awkwardly settled it over his right eye. Wearing something like that clearly wasn't in his usual repertoire. Once it was in place, the guards at the door no longer stopped them, and the strange effect on the steps vanished. Tony and his group stepped forward and entered the different ballroom. "The decor's not bad," Tony said, unable to keep his mouth shut. It was his usual way of easing the awkwardness. Pepper, having been here twice, knew the layout well. She led him to the conference room door. Tony couldn't help grumbling again. No one even came to meet us. How rude. Pepper ignored him and knocked twice, softly, on the office door. 43, Superhero Company. A very young voice called from beyond the door. Moments later, the door cracked open on its own, as if someone had been standing ready to let a visitor in. Tony pushed it the rest of the way and stepped into the conference room. It was surprisingly large, with a round table in the middle. 3 people sat around it. A 4th stood to the side. No, standing to the side wasn't a person at all, but some kind of transformer. Tony recognized 2 of the others, the man and woman he'd seen racing motorcycles the other day. The remaining face had to be Klein Moretti, the name Pepper had mentioned. All 4 were sitting around the table, playing cards. Ah, of course, Tony said with a grin. A dance hall, and it's turned into a card room. Makes perfect sense. He didn't pause to consider that he was an unexpected guest. He dragged over a chair and sat down, leaning back as if he belonged. Turning to Moretti, who was dealing, he added, "Moretti, why are there minors here? You didn't call me over just to babysit, did you?" Liana, who was 1 card away from losing, bristled at being spoken to like a child. She clearly didn't appreciate the implication. Liana reached out, snatched the cards from Amon's hand, and flung them back onto the table, then laughed at Tony. "I wonder which old man is so feeble he can't even climb a single step," she taunted. Tony's expression froze. He had no ready comeback. Liana gave the small round table a spiteful kick, pushed herself away, crossed her legs and leaned back, thoroughly pleased with herself. Klein waved a hand over the table. The scattered cards vanished at once. He rose, stepped aside, and bowed out of the center seat to make way for Amon. "Resorting to throwing cards when you can't win, well, that's progress," Klein said dryly. Liana, sitting next to him, flushed. She couldn't keep up the bravado now that she'd been exposed. Amon turned his attention to Tony and smiled. "Mr. Iron Man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Klein was only our contact. The one who truly wants to cooperate is me, with you." Tony arched a brow. He hadn't expected the real partner to be this boyish figure. And there was something unsettling about being examined through that single, cold monocle. Tony noticed something odd. Everyone in the room was wearing a monocle except for 2 women. Even Jarvis had generated one before they entered. He smirked. "What a weird rule," he murmured. Then he turned to the man opposite him. "So tell me, why do you want to work with me? It sounds like you were planning this before I disappeared." Amon chuckled. "Mr. Iron Man, you're a big name. You revealed your identity to the world. You serve as a bridge between humans and Autobots. And you run a business empire. Isn't that reason enough to want to collaborate?" Tony, unfazed by the compliment, accepted the titles with a nod. "Fair enough. But what exactly are you proposing?" Amon's smile widened. "Imagine a company built around superheroes. We'd gather heroes from across the globe, form an organization run by them, document their experiences, and publish those stories." Tony's eyes lit up. "That's a brilliant idea." "I, Tony Stark, am investing in this project," Tony announced. Amon shook his head before Tony could finish his smile. "Mr. Stark, I didn't call you here to ask for an investment. I invited you to be the first superhero of our company." Tony blinked. He'd never been one to work for anyone. "I don't work for other people," he said. "And you can't afford my salary." "Then don't pay a salary," Amon replied calmly. Tony's brow went up. "Excuse me? If there's no salary," Amon continued, "our heroes will form a guild. You can be the vice president. This company isn't about profit. It's about providing a platform and a stable environment for superheroes." Tony considered that, nodding slowly. "I like that idea. I didn't become a superhero for money either. But why me as vice president? Who's the president? Are you?" Liana, who had been watching from the side the whole time, awed in before Amon could answer. "It's me," she said plainly. "I'll be the president of the Superhero Guild, Mr. Vice President." Amon hadn't planned to put Liana in that role, but her voice left no room for argument. Liana was the first to hear that he was planning to start a superhero company, and she latched onto the idea immediately. She nagged and pleaded until she had Amon cornered. She wanted to form a guild and be its president. Amon resisted at first, but she wouldn't let it go, and eventually he relented. Tony nearly fell out of his chair. "What? You want to be president? You're not even an adult. Liana didn't miss a beat. Since when does being president depend on your age? It depends on strength. If you don't believe me, we can prove it. You put on your Iron Man suit, and I'll slice it open with one sword. Tony waved a hand dismissively and leaned back, ignoring the bait. I don't fight little girls, he said. Besides, let me show you something else. We'll turn this into a film and announce the company that way. Amon snapped his fingers. A clear, three-dimensional image sprang up above the table, a replay of the Decepticons' invasion of Manhattan. It wasn't a single snapshot, but a full sequence. Every Decepticon that had taken part was visible, even Megatron. The footage flowed like a finished movie. Tony in the Iron Man suit, Bumblebee and Peely Huo meeting, the motorcycle tribe racing through the streets, cutting down Decepticons as they pushed through the city. The recording was vivid and flawless, as real as if they'd been watching the event happen again. Where did you get these images? You didn't use drones to film them, did you? I didn't see any around, Tony said, puzzled. Amon chuckled and replied, casually, We have a professional photography team. Tony muttered under his breath. It couldn't be those mysterious men, could it? He was thinking of the officer's clone who'd transferred his wound that day. He paused, then nodded. Fine. I'll agree, but I'm not taking orders from that girl. Liana snorted. Humph. Like I care whether you take orders, you old playboy. She made no effort to hide her dislike. Tony Stark, the playboy, the arms dealer, all the labels annoyed her. Amon, unfazed, reached into his coat and tossed a red glove to Tony. What's this? Tony asked, catching it. He turned the glove over in his hands. Intricate, shifting patterns ran across the leather, and when he stared at them a moment, a strange vertigo washed over him, as if the design were trying to pull him in. Amon watched him and said, It's called the Tinder Glove. Think Prometheus stealing fire. Wear it and you get a range of Beyonder abilities. The headline power is theft. It can steal things, objects, life force, abilities. It can also reshape itself into any object roughly its size, according to the wearer's will. You can explore its other functions yourself. Is it really that extraordinary? Tony slid the glove onto his left hand. It was ambidextrous and fitted itself to him in seconds, molding to every contour. At the thought, the red fabric shimmered, wriggled, and reshaped into a watch, its color shifting to a sleek silver white. Rise up, sir. The little watch, the all-spark gauntlet reduced to a timepiece, chimed twice. Tony glanced down at it, then his eyes slid to the monocle perched over Amon's right eye. On impulse, Tony's left hand, wearing the all-spark watch, shot out. He twisted his wrist counterclockwise, trying to engage whatever mechanism might snatch the monocle away. He kept twisting until his forearm ached, but nothing happened. No luck. This thing's useless, he muttered. Amon chuckled, reached up and plucked the monocle from his eye, holding it out to Tony with a smile. Mr. Iron Man, you have good taste. This is a limited edition, one of a kind in the universe. If you want it, I'll give it to you. Tony flushed a little. He hadn't expected his attempt to be so transparently obvious. He waved his free hand in a quick, embarrassed refusal. No, thanks. I don't much like taking things handed to me. Oh, then I suppose fate has decided you aren't meant to have it? Amon said, slipping the monocle back over his eye. He followed that by making a slow, deliberate grabbing motion toward Tony's chest. A small sliver of metal suddenly winked into existence between Amon's thumb and forefinger. He flipped it, watching it spin, and let out a soft, amused chuckle. Heh, Mr. Iron Man, he said. This is what stealing looks like. Funny hobby, though, actually implanting fragments in your own body. Tony's eyes went wide. He recognized the piece at once. A shard of shrapnel from his chest. When a Stark Industries shell had struck him at close range, several fragments had lodged in his torso. The arc reactor in his chest wasn't just a power source. It powered an electromagnet that kept those pieces pinned away from his heart. He hadn't expected anyone to be able to pull one out so casually. How did you get it out? Tony asked, curiosity cutting through the shock. Was that the stealing you mentioned? Amon shrugged. It's simple. With a little practice, you can do it with the Allspark too. You could pull the rest of them out yourself. Tony blinked then, as if a different train of thought stopped in his head, asked suddenly, So, what should our company be called? He'd already pictured himself as the master of it. Amon adjusted his monocle and smiled. Let's call it Marvel Clash. On the testing grounds outside New York, a figure fell fast from the sky. With a thud, Tony landed in a textbook superhero pose. The armor around him began to unlatch and peel away. Tony stepped out, the suit folding up and following him like a shadow. This wasn't Jarvis running the system. This was Tony's improved Mark V. After collaborating with Jarvis, Tony had built a new AI, Friday. She wasn't yet on the level of the current Jarvis, but she was already far more capable than the old Jarvis had been before it became a transformer. All the Autobots on Earth had gathered here, and Bumblebee had even brought along a motorcyclist friend, Pili Huo, who'd been invited to help. "Looks like I'm the last one," Tony said as he joined the group. They were clustered around a silver mechanical form, the broken body of Jazz. They weren't here to mourn so much as to bring him back. The short version was this. Pili Huo, who'd grown close to Bumblebee, had learned from him that they'd lost a reliable teammate during the Decepticon invasion, and now the whole team was trying to revive that comrade. Pili Huo stepped forward, volunteering that he had a way to bring the fallen Jazz back to life. All eyes turned to him. He made a quick adjustment to his rearview mirror and wheels, then reached down to the lower part of his chest and produced a small, token-like device. "Energy token," he announced. Optimus Prime's mechanical brow lifted. The device felt uncannily like the Allspark. If not for its different appearance, Prime might have mistaken it for the real thing. Pili Huo moved up to Jazz and placed the energy token into the dead Autobot's Allspark chamber. As he pressed the token with his palm, it flared to life, threads of light and energy flowing into Jazz's chest. The gaping wound in Jazz's torso began to knit itself shut. Metal melded and panels reformed until, in moments, Jazz looked as if he had just rolled off an assembly line. Pili Huo couldn't help letting out a jubilant cry. "Revive, Jazz!" Jazz, who had been motionless with his optics shut, suddenly drew two sharp, ragged breaths. He opened his eyes, sat up slowly, and looked around, blinking as if waking from a long sleep. Optimus Prime, who had been watching Jazz closely, spoke first. "Welcome back, my friend." Tony peered at the small object in Pili Huo's hand. "What is this token? How can it bring you Transformers back to life? Does the energy it releases repair the special metal your bodies are made of, or does it reignite your Allspark, or whatever it's called?" Pili Huo, calm and good-natured, answered patiently. "The energy released by the energy token is a source of life for us motorcycle people. By absorbing it, we can mend damage, strengthen our Allspark, and even enhance ourselves." Jazz listened as they spoke, and the memory came flooding back. He had died, then been revived by this red transformer standing before him. He pushed himself up and faced his companions. "If all of you are all right," he said, "then the Decepticons' plan must have failed." He turned to Pili Huo and spoke solemnly. "I, Jazz, owe you my life. May I ask your name?" "Pili Huo," the red transformer replied. "I'll remember it," Jazz said with quiet gratitude. Tony, visibly curious and a little impatient, crouched down beside Pili Huo and called up eagerly. "Pili Huo, may I borrow your token for some research? I'm very curious about it." "This could expose the secret of your Transformers," Tony said. Pili Huo slipped the energy token back into his vest and replied, "No, the energy token is the symbol of the Mech Warrior King's appointment as captain of our motorcycle tribe, and it's also our source of life. I can't hand it to an outsider." Tony sighed and raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, such a good boy who listens to his mother." At S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nick Fury was slammed. Ever since Tony Stark went public as Iron Man and confirmed the existence of aliens, Fury hadn't had a moment's peace, constantly cleaning up the mess Tony left in his wake. The door to his office opened and Alexander Pierce walked in. Fury glanced up and set his work aside. There were plenty of things he wanted to say to his old friend. "Hey," Fury said, eyebrow raised. "Since when do you wear a monocle? I don't recall ever seeing you with one." Pierce pulled a chair over, sat down, and propped his leg on the edge of Fury's desk. "This," he said. "I'm getting old. Eyesight's gone a bit. Had someone custom make a monocle for me. Very high-end, handmade, and I must admit, everything does look a lot clearer with it on." "Want one, Nick? I'll give you one." Pierce eased the monocle out of his eye and drew a silk handkerchief from his pocket, polishing the lens with slow, deliberate strokes. Chapter 45, The Third Wolverine. Director Fury pictured himself trying to wear a monocle over his eye patch, shook his head, and grinned. Nope, I'd look ridiculous. Then he remembered something and turned the grin on Pierce. Now that I think about it, I wondered why so many people at the agency have been sporting monocles lately. Turns out they're all copying you, former director. Seems a lot of folks are trying to butter you up. Pierce settled the monocle back in place and chuckled. Oh, well, that just means they have good taste. At Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, Amon pushed open Professor Charles Xavier's office door, dragged over a chair, and flopped down, propping his feet up like he owned the place. Professor Xavier looked up from his paper, momentarily surprised, then smiled. Amon, you're back at school. I thought you and Ileana were going to skip all your classes this month. Professor Xavier called, amusement in his voice. Amon propped his head on his hand and shrugged. Professor, I like going to school, honestly, but Ileana was getting bored, and there have been some interesting things happening in New York lately, so I just took her out to see them for a few days. Charles chuckled. Heh, you two were gone for over a week. If I hadn't known better, I'd have wondered if something happened to you. Amon flipped his position and settled back more comfortably. Professor, don't you think teaching the same way at the academy is getting a bit stale? Why not try something different? Something different? Xavier paused, then shook his head. Do you mean having them take part in social activities, like students at other schools? I tried that once. You know as well as I do that mutants aren't ordinary people. We possess all kinds of extraordinary powers, and not every student can control theirs as well as you can. This often leads to accidents, Professor Charles Xavier said. That's why I've limited how often the students can interact with the outside world. Amon, still seated, lifted a finger and gave it a small, impatient wag to indicate his disagreement. Then he straightened. As if pulled by an invisible hand, his chair slid across the floor and came to rest at Professor Xavier's desk. Professor, Amon said, smiling faintly, you're not entirely wrong, but I can't agree. Mutants aren't fundamentally different from ordinary people. We just have unusual abilities. Put a normal person somewhere unsuited to them and they'll make mistakes. Put a mutant in the wrong place, and the consequences are far worse. It's not the people who are the problem so much as the environment they're put in. Charles leaned forward, interest sparking in his eyes. There's truth in that, he said. But where is the right place for us for mutants? You sound as if you have an idea. Amon's smile widened. Tell me, Professor, what do you think a group of superpowered individuals are best suited for? Charles hesitated, then offered, being superheroes? Amon shook his head. No, not superheroes. What they're best suited for is being stars, being idols. Huh? Charles blinked. The idea hung in the air like a foreign shape. He'd never considered it before. Amon leaned forward. Professor, think about it. People with extraordinary abilities, professionally packaged and presented, would be embraced by the public. We can brand mutants as superheroes and put them on the big screen. Haven't you always worked toward integrating the mutant community into society? This is a perfect method. Look at Captain America, still revered as the embodiment of American spirit even decades after World War II. Or Tony Stark, he announced himself a superhero, and now he's wildly popular, an idol to many. Charles pondered the suggestion. For a heartbeat, his eyes brightened with possibility. Then he sighed, and the light faded. It's an intriguing plan, he said slowly, but the implementation would require the support of many different forces. Funding isn't the problem, but the government certainly won't agree. Amon smiled calmly. Professor, as long as you give your blessing, I've already taken care of the rest. All that's missing is a team of super-powered people to be proper superheroes, Amon declared. Prepared? What have you prepared? Professor Charles Xavier asked, surprised. Amon adjusted the monocle at his eye, its lens cut like crystal, and smiled. Didn't I tell you? After a beat, he continued. I've set up a company. Tony Stark and I put it together a while ago to provide services for heroes. It already has a name, Marvel Clash. Charles brightened. A brilliant name. Amon, you're more capable than I realized. This is impressive. Professor, you agree? Amon asked. Good. I'll borrow the X-Men for a while. I'll bring them back when everything's settled. With that, he stood, walked to the door, and gave a friendly wave. Bye-bye, Professor, Charles chuckled softly. That kid. At Xavier's school, Scott Summers, Cyclops, was the team's current leader. In his office that afternoon sat 3 people: Scott himself, his girlfriend Jean Grey, who everyone called Phoenix, and the ever-uninvited Logan, Wolverine. Logan was stretched out in one of the chairs without a hint of shame. Scott glared. He was far from amused. Scott's tone was sharp. "Logan, why are you always here? Don't you have anywhere else to go?" Wolverine didn't answer. Jean, Phoenix, who had been standing nearby, spoke up before he could. "Scott, how can you say that? Logan's joining the X-Men. Of course he needs to spend time with you, as our leader." Caught between his irritation and his girlfriend's defense, Scott couldn't argue. He turned his face away from Logan with a faint, offended humph. The room grew awkward. Even Wolverine, who'd seen his share of romantic friction, felt a little uncomfortable. Just then there was a knock at the door. "Come in," Scott called, still sounding uneasy. Jean rose and opened the door. Standing in the frame was Peter Rasputin, Colossus, tall, broad, and the older brother of Amon and Liana. Scott, eyeing Logan still lounging in the chair, snapped, "You're still sitting there. I have things to attend to." "Everyone not involved, please leave." Logan scowled and was already pushing himself up when a voice stopped him from the doorway. "Uncle Wolf, stay for now. It'll save me the trouble of hunting you down later." Amon was leaning in the frame, grinning as he jabbed at Scott. "Scott, keep an eye on Ms. Grey. Don't let her get snatched up. Logan's been at this forever. His pull with women is something you wouldn't believe." Scott frowned but forced a small smile. "Thanks, Amon, but Jean wouldn't be interested in some lazy, irresponsible guy like that." Chapter 46. Marvel Confrontation appeared overnight. Wolverine didn't have anywhere to go, so he stayed seated in the chair, one leg down and the other crossed over it. He glanced up at Amon and asked, curious, "Hey, Amon, kid, why aren't you with Ileana? What are you doing here with us?" Amon answered lightly, almost breezy, "I saw you sitting around doing nothing, Uncle Wolf, so I gave you something to do." "A job," Wolverine said, puzzled. "What kind of job?" They'd all been a little aimless at the mansion lately. There just weren't as many missions as before. Amon explained, "I started a new company in the superhero business. I already convinced Professor X, and he agreed the X-Men should join the company. It'll help shape how the public sees mutants, change the stereotype of mutants being a threat. That'll do more for our image than just calling ourselves the X-Men." Scott blinked. "Professor X actually agreed? Huh? This superhero company idea might actually work." It wasn't just Professor X who was worried. Everyone at the X-Mansion had been thinking about the future of the mutant race. Now that they had a good, workable plan, Scott was eager to try it. Peter, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke up. "I already said I'd give Amon's company a shot. What are you all so worried about?" As Amon's older brother, Peter naturally sided with him. Amon had briefed him about the company, and Peter had agreed almost without thinking. Jean and Scott exchanged looks and nodded. "Since Professor X approved the plan, Jean and I are on board," Scott said. "It's just that I don't know what a certain layabout is thinking." He shot a pointed look at Wolverine. Logan growled in return, folding his arms. "There's nothing at the X-Mansion that needs my attention right now," he said, "and I don't know what some people spend their days doing either. As for Amon's company, sure, I'll join. It's getting boring sitting around the mansion all the time." Jean, ever diplomatic, cut in. "Aurora will be in Africa for a while with T'Challa," she said. "Whether she'll want to join us, we'll find out when she gets back." Amon clapped his hands and laughed. "Good," he said. "If everyone agrees, then start preparing. This afternoon, we're going to New York to iron out the details with our partner, Tony Stark." "Iron Man," Amon said. Scott blinked. "Iron Man? The guy who's been all over the news lately? The one they say was the first to contact aliens?" Amon nodded. "We formed the company with him. His name will give us instant credibility, and he's obsessively thorough with projects like this. It's easier to let him take the lead." New Yorkers were stunned that day. It wasn't another alien attack. It was a building. Overnight, a tower had appeared that dwarfed even Stark Tower. People gaped at the gap where earlier structures had stood, unable to explain how those buildings had vanished or who had erected this new one so quickly. The structure hadn't just materialized raw. It appeared fully finished and furnished, and there seemed to be shadowy figures moving behind its windows. Across the facade, in glowing high-tech lettering, was the name, Marvel Clash. This was the headquarters Amon had arranged for his superhero company. It hadn't been stolen or constructed by human crews. It was a miracle. Over the years, Amon's avatars had a reputation for making impossible wishes come true. War had left whole regions with no homes, places like Afghanistan, Sokovia, and others where people lived in tents or not at all. Whenever Amon's avatars granted wishes, most requests were small and practical: a meal, a blanket, a roof. By casually answering those pleas, Amon ended up collecting a huge number of requests and, with them, a bank of miracles tied to creating buildings. After a while, manifesting a structure had become straightforward for him. So when the new building appeared overnight, a broad, modern block rising where only a cluster of small factories had stood the day before, it didn't feel like magic to those who knew Amon. The staff moving through its corridors were not ordinary workers, but Amon's avatars, efficient and tireless, operating everything from reception to maintenance. Amon, how did you do this? Liana tugged on his sleeve, eyes wide. Yesterday, there were just a few little factories here. Now there's this huge building. You didn't pull another one of those historical shadows, did you? Amon adjusted his monocle and answered, as if the matter were trivial. Easy. I performed a miracle. He gave her a half-amused reprimand. And Liana, really, don't be dense. Didn't I tell you historical shadows can only reproduce things that actually existed? This wasn't pulled from history. It was made. Have you ever seen a building exactly like this one? Amon asked. Just like this, Liana agreed. Amon reached out casually and plucked a shape from the air. In his palm appeared a figure Liana knew instinctively, herself, down to the smallest detail, except the eyes looked vacant, as if someone had taken the life out of them. See, isn't this something that actually existed? Amon said, tapping the little replica's head with a fingertip. Nice head. Hey, don't tap it randomly. What if you make me stupid? Liana snapped, swatting his hand away and stepping forward to examine the small apparition. She ran her fingers over the replica's body. It's exactly the same. I want to learn how to do that. Demonstrate a few more times and I'll record the ability. She jingled the key on the necklace at her throat. The key was a door pathway mystical item, given to her mainly to stop the Hell Lord Belasco from teleporting her to the Hell border, but as a demigod-ranked artifact, it still carried its full suite of powers. Its most basic function was recording. It could store other abilities for later use. We'll talk about that later, Amon said, glancing up. Your teammates are here. Liana followed his gaze toward the sky. A sleek, high-tech fighter jet sliced across the sky and came in low. It was the kind of Black Ops technology Hank Beast McCoy had been tinkering with. The aircraft could cross a city like New York without tripping a single air traffic alarm. The X-Men's jet touched down on the helipad reserved on the top of the Marvel Clash Tower. Wolverine was the first out of the cabin, cigar clenched between his teeth. He took in the view and whistled. This beats Stark Tower by a mile. Amon, kid, you're filthy rich. Jean, Phoenix, pressed her lips together in surprise. Since when did a building like this pop up in New York? Colossus Peter shook his head in mock scandal. Amon, you actually started a company this big and didn't tell me? The top floors were all about entertainment and relaxation, lounges, terraces, and a semi-open-air swimming pool that overlooked the city. The group settled onto a sofa beside the pool to wait for Tony Stark. He was late, and Scott folded his arms, annoyed. Didn't we agree to meet at 3 this afternoon? He's 10 minutes late. Where's Tony Stark? Scott grumbled. Wolverine, who was used to squabbling with Scott, snorted. Kids these days, no patience. Amon chuckled. Maybe he's already here, but too shy to come in. Maybe he's peeking from outside. Wolverine ignored him and let his gaze wander around the room until it settled on a nearby wine cabinet. Drawn to the bottles, he reached for one. What kind of wine is this? Chapter 47, Corporate Department. Wolverine, an old drinker, immediately recognized the quality of the bottles on the shelf. He grabbed one and asked Amon about it. Amon adjusted his monocle out of habit, smiled and said, That's Moet, a treasure from Napoleon's cellar. It's older than you are. The whole setup had been arranged by Amon's avatars. Although Amon often fiddled with his monocle, he could communicate with his avatars without it. Most of the wine had simply been pilfered by them from various places. A few bottles, however, were literal historical acquisitions, like the one in Wolverine's hand, Napoleon's favorite Moet, plucked straight from the French emperor's dining table by an avatar. Older than me, huh? I don't even remember how long I've been around, Wolverine grunted. He extended his adamantium claws, slit the bottle's neck, and took a long swallow. Ah, man, that's good. Just then, as Wolverine rummaged through the wine cabinet, the water in the bath began to ripple. A flash of gold and red streaked down from the sky. The armor hit in a three-point stance, then split open and stepped aside to reveal a tall, lean man, Jarvis. Tony, never one to take chances, had brought him along for the meeting. Even though he'd technically arrived late, Tony puffed up and said with mock indignation, "Not bad, punctual. You didn't make me wait." He gave the building a once-over and nodded approvingly. "Nice design. I like this place." The truth was he'd actually been there much earlier. When Jarvis pinged him about a structure taller than Stark Tower suddenly appearing in New York, Tony had rushed over and spent half a day circling the exterior, trying to figure out how a massive building could go up overnight without anyone noticing. He turned to Amon and quipped, "Did you hire a Chinese construction crew? Looks like we'll need to find a few for the Manhattan restoration project." "You can try," Amon said, non-committal. Tony was about to say more when he caught sight of Wolverine still rummaging around for wine. "Oh, Wolverine, what are you doing? Don't waste that bottle of old single malt. Look at you, like you've never had a drink before." "Humph." Wolverine downed the single malt Tony had warned him about in one long pull, then tossed the empty bottle back toward Tony. "Here, since you like it so much." Tony reached out, caught the bottle without thinking, and froze. The label was the same as the one he'd lost in Afghanistan. That vintage had long been discontinued. The last bottle he remembered was the one he'd taken with him to Afghanistan, and he'd lost it in a terrorist attack. He set the empty on the nearest table, and eyes narrowing as he scanned the room, asked, "Which one of you X-Men is in charge here?" Cyclops stepped forward, extending his hand. "Scott Summers, Cyclops, Mr. Stark, I'm the captain of the X-Men." Tony didn't take the offered hand. "I never shake hands with anyone." Scott's expression tightened for a heartbeat. He kept his hand out, slid his fingers up to adjust his shades, and thought irritably that the man in front of him was as aggravating as that wolf. Mentally, he lumped Tony and Wolverine into the same difficult category. Tony shifted his attention to the others, Colossus and Jean Grey. Colossus spoke up in a deep, measured voice. "Pyotr Rasputin, Colossus." "Rasputin," Tony murmured the name to himself. Tony squinted at the two he'd just noticed, the surly little girl and the reserved young man who both bore the Rasputin name, and turned to Colossus. "So what's your relationship with those two?" he asked. Colossus hesitated for a moment, then answered, "You mean Amon and Liana? They're my younger siblings." "Ah," Tony nodded, then shifted his attention to the last person in the group. He smiled and aimed a practiced charm at her. "And you, gorgeous, what's your name? You look familiar. We should have a drink sometime and talk properly." Scott jumped in before Jean could respond. "She's Jean Grey, my girlfriend. She's one of our X-Men, but she's also a doctor of psychology and biology. You might have seen her at some academic conferences." Scott's tone was overly protective, the way he got around Jean ever since Wolverine arrived at the school. Tony couldn't resist poking at him. "Ha! Still guarding your dinner, are you?" Jean rolled her eyes. She'd been like this around Scott's possessiveness for a while, and her telepathic sensitivity made her quick to pick up on his unease. There was even a faint sting of jealousy under his calm exterior. Jean laid a hand on Scott's shoulder and said softly, "It's all right, Scott. Don't you trust me?" She hesitated a moment, then turned to Tony. "My code name is Phoenix. Just call me Jean. I gave a lecture on mutants in academic circles not long ago. There were a lot of reporters there. You might have read about me then." "Maybe," Tony said, cool and indifferent. "I never paid much attention to mutant affairs before." Logan bristled at being shrugged off, but Tony hadn't asked him anything, so he had no intention of introducing himself. He stayed silent, nursing his drink, until Scott, ever the spokesman for the group, supplied an introduction for him. That drunk over there is Logan. People call him Wolverine. Don't mind him. He's only here for free food and booze. Logan didn't bother to retort. He was already absorbed in his glass of fine wine. A new figure stepped out at the edge of the pool, Starlight, and then, towering over everyone, a giant red and blue robot strode into view. Next to him, the outdoor pool looked like nothing more than a puddle. "I am Optimus Prime," the robot announced. "I represent the Autobots. I was invited by Tony." Someone in a suit stepped out from behind Optimus and offered a polite wave. "Hi, everyone. I'm Klein. Officially, I'm the president of this company, but in reality, I'm just an employee. Amon is the one who runs things. Optimus Prime is too tall for the elevator, so he tracked me down and I teleported him up. Hey, Amon, his powers seem similar to yours." Colossus, who was sitting next to Amon, blurted out. Amon nodded. "I noticed that too." Klein stood a little over 1.7 meters, not striking in appearance, but very refined and scholarly. He usually wore a suit and a top hat, which gave him a rather pleasant air. The others reintroduced themselves and got acquainted. When most people were settled, Amon clapped his hands to get everyone's attention and began speaking. "I'll go over what makes this company different. I won't bother with things that are the same as any ordinary firm. First, all positions are filled at the moment. If you want to bring in new people, you can replace the current employees. Don't worry, they'll understand. We also have a recruitment department whose job is to find and train superpowered individuals. That's a critical unit. And there's a department dedicated to documenting the experiences of superheroes like you. They also provide a measure of protection for the company's superheroes. You'd be wise not to replace the staff in that department. They're extremely hard to find." Chapter 48. The past is the past. The present is the present. Don't use the past to judge the present. When we founded the company, we deliberately set up a special division, the Mutant Reclamation Department, Amon said. Part of this company was built with mutants in mind. That department can remove a mutant's abilities, but only with their consent. For most first- and second-tier mutants, their powers aren't very useful and often come with harmful side effects, physical deformities, chronic pain, that sort of thing. They can come to us to sell or relinquish their abilities. Of course, they can also opt to only have the negative effects removed. It's entirely up to the mutant. When he finished, everyone's eyes went wide, except Klein and Liana. Optimus Prime didn't react either. He wasn't human. Liana, having long since grown used to Amon's unusual talents, showed no surprise. "You can eliminate mutant abilities?" Scott blurted. "You mean this can be undone? Does the professor know about this?" Scott couldn't sit still. The idea that someone could take away a mutant's power was unimaginable, an ability that could shake the very foundations of the mutant world. "Don't get excited, Brother Summers. Sit down first." Amon's tone was calm but authoritative. "We only remove their powers. We don't kill them. Think of it like a commodity. After a transfer, the commodity still exists. It just changes hands. Mutant abilities work the same way. They simply end up with someone who needs them more." Amon's words were persuasive. At once, Brother Summers relaxed and sat back. Amon went on, "And don't rotate P through that department. It's deep waters in there. Others wouldn't be able to handle it. If you have any more questions, ask Klein. He's running it. When does the Superhero Guild start? I have a great idea." Tony asked. "You should ask her." Amon indicated Liana with a casual thumb toward where she was getting a shoulder rub from Artemis. Liana waved Artemis off and sat up, eyes bright. "Ha, Vice President, you just reminded me. I have a fantastic plan too. Let's put it into action now." Tony forced a smile. He didn't think whatever Liana had in mind was going to be a good idea. A short time later, Tony held another press conference, and the news world was rocked once more. Tony had another splashy announcement. At a press conference, he revealed that Iron Man, Tony Stark, had launched a new company built around the idea of superheroes. He said he'd teamed up with the X-Men and even the alien Autobots to form a massive superhero coalition. Anyone who wanted to become a superhero could apply to the Marvel Clash group for an interview. Those who passed would get formal training. Who is the superhero? My friend, you are the real superhero. Tony crowed, pointing straight at the camera as if he were telling everyone watching that they too could don a mask and cape. In S.H.I.E.L.D.'s command center, the feed was on every screen. Fury watched, then, fed up, threw his coffee cup at the main monitor. It went through with a loud crack. "Agent, that's the 5th screen you've broken in 2 weeks," someone barked. Maria Hill pinched the bridge of her nose. "Then apply for the funding, sir. The base's equipment is overdue for an upgrade," she said, deadpan. Fury just grunted. What exactly does Stark think he's doing? Does he have to throw the whole world into chaos? He's even working with mutants. And what's this unique? What the hell is going on? How can they be collaborating with Tony Stark? Fury barked. Facing her superior's outburst, Maria Hill kept her voice calm and methodical. The unique cabaret surfaced about 2 years ago. Its reach is global. The New York location was the first to appear and is believed to be the headquarters. They're extremely mysterious. It's as if they just sprang up overnight. S.H.I.E.L.D. has investigated, but we haven't turned up anything definitive. All we can say for sure is that their public spokesman is a young man named Klein Moretti. Maria's answer came smoothly. She'd already pulled at S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files on Unique before the meeting. Fury nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Send Black Widow to dig into this. Also notify the White House. I need to speak with them." "Yes, sir." Maria Hill moved immediately to make the arrangements. Fury stepped into a darkened briefing room lined with monitors. He flipped a switch. The screens blinked to life as operators and field agents began logging on one by one. "Fury, why did you suddenly call this meeting?" "We've got a lot on. No time to be held up by you." Voices crackled from the screens. Each face belonged to a high-ranking White House official assigned as a point of contact with S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury watched them all, and his expression darkened. The camera didn't pick it up clearly. Between the poor feed and his complexion, no one on the other end seemed to notice. He did notice something else, however. These vampires who occupied the seats of power weren't behaving like officials at all. On one screen, the background was a sunlit beach. The man on it was clearly on vacation, leaning back with a drink in hand. Others looked distracted, lounging or half turned away from their cameras. Fury didn't bother with pleasantries. "Gentlemen," he said bluntly, "how are you running things? How did something this big happen?" The beachgoer glanced around the frame and laughed. "Ha, our S.H.I.E.L.D. director lost it, right? I've said for a long time we should replace him. What problem are you talking about?" "Exactly. No problem at all." Others on the call chimed in with the same casual dismissal. One of Fury's eyes widened. He could hardly believe it. "Don't you read the news? Tony Stark set off a massive scandal. How could you not know?" "Why did you approve that company Marvel Clash?" Nick Fury asked. An official laughed, pinching the bridge of his nose to keep his monocle from slipping. "Approve? Of course. Think about it. Turning superheroes into a recognized profession could advance society. It's brilliant." Another man, equally amused, adjusted his monocle as he chimed in. "And bringing mutants into the fold could ease the divide between humans and mutants. Integration, social stability, what's not to like?" Fury stared at them. These were the same people who had spent years resisting superheroes and pushing to keep mutants under tight control. Now they were singing a very different tune. Had Tony Stark bought them off? Were they being blackmailed by mutants? Or was it the influence of that other mysterious factor, the so-called unique? Fury couldn't imagine a single convincing explanation. He folded his arms and let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You weren't like this before." That comment seemed to hit a nerve. One of the officials smirked and replied with chilly ease. "Before was before. Now is now." "Don't compare the past to the present, Nick Fury. If you can't even grasp that, I'll go to the higher-ups and ask them to replace you as S.H.I.E.L.D.'s director with someone smarter." Chapter 49. I Hate Stares. Fury sat through the conference call with a flat, fish-like stare, saying nothing. An elderly official on the screen snapped at him. "Fury, do your job. Stop interfering with our arrangements." "Then the meeting is over," the man barked. Fury didn't wait for anyone else's consent. "How rude," he said, and cut the feed. The screen hesitated for a beat as someone on the other end muttered before the connection finally dropped. "A bunch of profiteering politicians," Fury muttered, lingering in the empty conference room until his anger subsided. He pushed himself up, rubbed his temples, and turned to his aide, Hill. "Refile the funding request," he said. Tell them the base's conference room is unusable. Hey, who's the president here, you or me? Liana snapped. I got this guild from Amon. Without me, you wouldn't even have a vice president title. Know your place. She'd brought forward one good idea after another, only to have the mustached man across from her dismiss each one as childish. Tony Stark leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his iced drink, and replied with a smirk. Your ideas are the kind of things an immature kid comes up with. Oh, right, you are a kid. You should just be the mascot and leave the decision-making to me. I'm the adult here, Tony said, dismissive. Liana bristled. This is a superhero guild. Decisions should be made by people with real powers. Do you have any? All I see is you tucked inside an iron suit. Tony scoffed, took another sip of his iced drink, and grinned. Having a brain is a kind of power too, and it's often more useful than flashy powers. Fortunately for you, I'm a genius. From what I've seen, you don't have that one. A flash of annoyance crossed Liana's face. This man's mouth was worse than Amon's. No wonder Amon wanted to work with him. Birds of a feather, she thought. Fine, little girl, Tony added, already easing back into his arrogance. Just follow my arrangements. I've got other things to do. With that, he rose and left the office. Watching his self-satisfied retreat, Liana felt a cold little sting of displeasure. Then an idea struck. She closed her fingers around the key pendant at her throat and, quiet as a cat, activated an ability she'd recently copied from Amon. Tony walked toward the exit, glanced down at the steps beneath his feet, and suddenly an unpleasant memory welled up in his mind. He shook his head. This isn't some weird place. I'm still in charge here, at least partly. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Tony's stomach tightened. 4, 5, 6. He still couldn't get down a staircase that only had 3 flights. Gods, who's messing with me now? He muttered. Oh, look, our brilliant genius can't even walk down the stairs. Use that giant brain of yours. Stairs are easy, right? Liana strutted past, deliberately slowing so he could watch her go down without a hitch. Then, with a casual flicker, she vanished from sight. Petty, Tony swore under his breath. He realized instantly what she was doing, teasing him with the same trick because he'd just called her brainless. After 17 minutes of exasperated trial, he finally made it down. He tapped the bracelet on his wrist. Streams of data converged, and Jarvis appeared. Jarvis sounded puzzled. Sir, do you need me for something? Tony frowned. Jarvis, didn't you receive the signal I sent over the last few minutes? I only just got the one you sent now, Jarvis replied. Before that, the last message I recorded from you was this morning, when you asked me to tell Miss Potts you were going out. I haven't received anything in between. Tony nodded, thinking to himself. If even his electronic transmissions couldn't get out, could electromagnetic signals be blocked? He'd need to find a way to counter whatever was interfering. Using Jarvis's network reach, Tony routed himself back to his experimental site on the outskirts of New York. He'd turned the compound into a base and bought up all the land around it. He'd planned to talk with Optimus Prime about operate arrangements. He'd even convinced Optimus and the Autobots to join Marvel Clash to help them integrate into human society. But when Tony reached the base and saw the long flight of steps up to the entrance, he gave up on hunting down Optimus for the moment. He was exhausted and badly needed rest. Jarvis, find someone to remove all the steps in the base. Those stairs are a pain. Get rid of them, Tony ordered. Yes, sir, Jarvis replied. He didn't know why Tony wanted it done, but he set the task in motion anyway. You're the real superhero. Leon jumped up from the sofa, eyes shining. He wanted to be one. Mr. Starr, I want to be a superhero. What do you think? The answer didn't come aloud. It slipped into his mind instead, a calm, amused voice. Suit yourself. Mr. Starr wasn't really a kindly old man. He was Amon Avatar. The day Agent Coulson and Leon had gone to investigate a preacher calling himself Amon Avatar, Amon had noticed something unusual about the boy. On impulse, he split off a smaller aspect of himself and established a shallow parasitic bond, taking on the guise of Mr. Starr and slipping into the role of the boy's grandfather. It wasn't dangerous. The parasitism was intentionally shallow. It didn't harm the host, only nudged habits and reactions now and then. And it could be severed at any time, letting the boy return entirely to himself. That was why the voice could speak inside Leon's head, and why Mr. Star sometimes knew things he shouldn't. Amon was there, quietly watching and guiding, if only a little. Parasitism, at its simplest, is theft. It takes something from a host and shortens whatever time that host has left. At a deeper, more insidious level, parasitism doesn't just borrow, it occupies. Deep-level parasitism can seize a host's body, mind, and spirit entirely, remaking that person into an avatar of the parasite. In that sense, it's the logical extreme of the stealing instinct, stripping away a life, an identity, even the self, and replacing it with something else. Leon had always been the sort of young man who lived on ideals. He grew up idolizing heroes like Captain America and wanted nothing more than to stand for something larger than himself. When he stumbled into S.H.I.E.L.D., he was captivated by the agency's mysterious promise to protect world harmony and immediately signed on as an agent. Reality, however, was less glamorous than the brochures. Being a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent did not automatically mean saving the world. Junior agents like Leon spent most of their time on small investigative jobs while the higher-ups handled the big crises. Director Fury's presence was constant and oppressive in ways Leon hadn't expected, and slowly, the enthusiasm that had driven him to enlist began to fade. Because of how S.H.I.E.L.D. worked, though, leaving wasn't simple, and so Leon stayed on, drifting through routine assignments until a routine mission changed everything. He was sent out with Agent Coulson, and for the first time in a long while, found himself facing something extraordinary. Amon Avatar, Mr. Star. In that moment, standing beside people who actually mattered, Leon felt like the protagonist in his own story again. He even ended up with a grandfatherly mentor, straight out of an Eastern novel, and he awakened a striking new power. Mr. Star called it world harmony. World harmony let him manipulate luck and misfortune in a limited area, pulling bad luck toward people or objects, or reallocating good fortune to produce remarkable effects. Mr. Star explained that he had been drawn to that variability, which is why he entered Leon's body, to help him cultivate it. At the time, Leon thought, this is the fated protagonist, and refused flatly when Fury assigned him another task. He had always disliked Fury, the black man. 50. Luck and misfortune, thanks to Big Boss Jatiangang Suifeng Yuchen for the generous support. When world harmony awakened, its ripple upset the balance of luck in the area. Fortune and misfortune twisted together, and a streak of bad luck spread through the surroundings. Agent Coulson was hit the hardest. For several days, everything that could go wrong did. Meanwhile, Leon pulled out his phone and, without hesitation, dialed the number he liked the least. The call connected, and before the other end could speak, Leon barked into the line. Hey, you bald egg, I'm quitting. I'm going to be a superhero. Anyone who wants to keep being an agent can, but I'm done. He hung up before Fury could even answer. On the other end, Fury sat stunned. He remembered this bold agent and the last time Leon had called him that ridiculous name, but he hadn't expected Leon to actually resign. Fury called his adjutant, Hill. Send someone to check on the agent named Leon, he ordered. I suspect there's something wrong with him. Maria Hill pushed a dossier across the table. Lion Jones, level 4 agent, with S.H.I.E.L.D. for about a year. When he joined, he'd been eager, almost overeager. In the months since he'd grown quieter, more disengaged. 2 weeks ago, after a mission with Coulson, he'd taken leave, and according to the report, insulted the director. Hill bit the corner of a smile so Fury wouldn't see it. She'd heard the story. The insult had been petty and childish, a thrown-off nickname, Black Bald Egg, and for once the description fit Nick Fury too neatly. Fury caught the look on her face and raised an eyebrow. Outside, the plaza in front of the Marvel Clash headquarters throbbed with noise. Reporters fought for the best vantage point, gawkers craned for photos, and a handful of mutants with obvious physical deformities clustered near a booth advertising treatments to suppress their mutations. A much smaller, more hopeful group had come for another reason entirely, to audition, to try and become superheroes. Leon stepped out of a taxi and fumbled for his wallet. The driver grinned and waved him off. Kid, you're lucky today, he said. My lottery ticket just won. I'm in a great mood. Your fare's on me. Have a good time, Leon called, smiling. Uncle, you're so lucky, he added. That's the kind of luck a protagonist should have, the man replied with a wink. Lion found him easy to talk to. On a whim, he tried to pass along some of his own good fortune, and to his surprise, the man actually won the recruitment lottery on the spot. Lion grinned as he looked up at the impressive building in front of him. "This is where I belong." He strode toward the entrance. People seemed to sense his good fortune and made way for him as he passed, so he slipped into the Marvel Clash recruitment office without trouble. A warm, familiar feeling rose in him, like coming home. Staff along the corridor greeted him cheerfully, and Lion felt certain he'd come to the right place. The interviews here didn't require a pre-submitted resume. Candidates simply queued and were called in one by one. Lion took a seat and waited. The person in the room ahead of him finished and stepped out. Lion glanced around, realized it was his turn, smoothed his clothes, and walked in with confidence. The interview room was made of frosted glass. People on the other side could just make out shapes, but the walls were soundproof. The chatter and clatter of the corridor fell away the moment Lion stepped inside. 4 interviewers sat at the table. On the ends were 2 company representatives, both wearing monocles. Seated between them were the red-haired Phoenix, Jean Grey, and the broad-shouldered Colossus, Peter. Lion grinned and threw out a casual, "Hey! Nice to meet you all. You guys are pretty awesome." "Spirited," the interviewer on the far left remarked, with a faint smile. Lion leaned back and introduced himself. "Lion Jones. I used to be an agent, but it wasn't for me. I heard about your company on TV and thought I'd come by for an interview. Jean Grey glanced at him, eyes sharp. "Your mental state is stable. Do you have any unusual abilities?" Lion tapped his chin, thinking a moment. "You mean like superpowers?" "Yeah, I'm lucky. I can control luck and misfortune." Colossus looked genuinely intrigued. "That's rather unusual. Can you show us? Got any props? Dice or something?" Lion asked, shaping an imaginary cube with his fingers. Just as Colossus opened his mouth to say they didn't have any, the leftmost interviewer reached into a pocket and produced a handful of dice. "I've got this," Lion said. The interviewer passed a handful of dice to Colossus, signaling him to test the candidate. Colossus rolled them between his large fingers and asked, "What do you want me to do?" Lion looked at the 6 dice in his palm and answered confidently, "Throw them all. I'll say they'll all come up 6s. "You're that sure?" Colossus raised an eyebrow, then tossed the dice onto the table. They rattled and spun, 1 6, 2 6s, 3 6s, until the last die settled. Every die showed 6 pips. "Well, I'll be," Colossus muttered. He threw them again. They all landed on 6 once more. He repeated the toss a few more times. Each time every die came up 6. "Change the number," Colossus said after a moment. "Try something else." "All 5s, Lion said, opening his hands as if to emphasize his confidence. Colossus hurled the dice again. When they stopped, all 6 faces displayed 5 pips. "Truly incredible," both Colossus and Phoenix said in unison. "All right, you've passed," the interviewer announced. "Go register in the room in back. You can start superhero training in a week. We'll send you a notification." "That easy? Then I'm going," Lion said, grinning, and walked toward the back room to complete his registration. A man was walking down the street when he heard a sharp click. He looked down and saw his keys lying on the pavement. Relief flooded him. At least they hadn't fallen into the sewer. The keys were jammed in the narrow gap of a nearby manhole cover, stuck fast. He crouched to pick them up. In the awkward motion, his phone, which had been in his pocket, slipped free. It slid through the same gap with a sickening plop and disappeared into the sewer below. He heard the water take it. Before he could react, the manhole cover vibrated from the movement. The keys, no longer wedged, tumbled in after the phone. "No!" he shouted, collapsing onto the curb and peering helplessly down the hole, trying to imagine how to get either item back. A water truck rolled by at that moment and sprayed through the street. He got soaked. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, flinging his hands out as if to shake the bad luck off. "Am I cursed? Why me?" Somewhere, the universe kept its balance. Luck and misfortune were conserved. Someone's gain meant another's loss. That was the quiet law of things. World harmony, if you wanted to give it a name. At Tony Stark's suburban base, Tony lay on an operating table, shirtless. The arc reactor in his chest glowed beneath his skin, a cool, steady light in the dim room. Ratchet stood over the operating table, a large red glove, the spark glove, fitted to his hand. "This thing's fascinating," he said. "It can even read thoughts, but I think I can get the shrapnel out of your chest without it. I'm a professional." Tony, half lying back on the table, glanced up. "The glove's safer. Your hands are huge." Ratchet gave a small nod. "All right, I'm already practiced with the tool. Ready?" "If you are, then do it," Tony replied. "Go ahead." 51. Gwen and Spider. "Then I'll start." Ratchet finished speaking, and his enormous hand, its palm nearly half the size of Tony's body, began to rotate counterclockwise. A metallic shard slid into his palm. "Success!" Tony, feeling no pain, grinned. "What a useful little gadget. Keep going. Get all the shrapnel out at once." Ratchet continued to rotate his wrist. One by one, the fragments were drawn from Tony's chest and deposited into a glass container. When the last piece was removed, Ratchet extended his right hand, and a scanner popped out, sweeping across Tony's chest for a moment. "Tony, all the shrapnel's out," Ratchet said. "But you've already developed mild palladium poisoning. You need to remove the reactor from your chest or drastically cut back on using it as soon as possible." He took off the spark gauntlet and handed it to Tony. The device reconfigured itself in Tony's hand into a wristwatch, and he snapped it back on. "All right," Tony said. "Then let's do it this time. Help me remove the reactor and patch that big hole. Finally, I don't have to have a light bulb stuck in my chest anymore." Ratchet, his huge metal hand closing around a tiny scalpel, moved slowly toward Tony's palm. Tony flinched. "Ugh, this pressure is awful. Wait, did you give me anesthesia?" he blurted, then clapped a hand over his mouth, as if to stop himself from sounding foolish. Ratchet's faceplate twitched in an embarrassed smile. "Oh, right. I forgot," he admitted sheepishly. Dark grease streaks crossed Tony's cheeks. He tried for a joke, but it came out strained. "I'm not like you guys. My body isn't made of metal. If you operate on me without anesthesia, I'll go straight to heaven." Ratchet's expression sobered. "I'll be careful," he said, forcing a serious tone. The next morning, Peter Parker was up and out before he could talk himself out of it. Today, Midtown High was visiting Osborn Industries labs, and he'd been looking forward to the trip for weeks. After grabbing a quick piece of toast Aunt May had left on the table, he slung his backpack over one shoulder, slipped his camera into place, and stepped outside. At the corner, Gwen Stacy was waiting for him, blonde hair catching the morning light, all energy and bright smiles. She'd been his first crush, and seeing her there made the whole day feel like it already had promise. Gwen spotted Peter and waved him over with a grin. "Peter, over here! Coming!" Peter jogged up, scratching the back of his head. "Gwen, I'm so sorry. Didn't mean to keep you waiting." Gwen waved off the apology and handed him a steaming cup. "I knew it would be like this. You probably didn't eat breakfast properly. I brought you hot chocolate." Peter took the cup and gave her a sheepish smile. "You're the best, Gwen. And you still have to take pictures for me, so you can't be running on empty," she teased. "Come on, if we miss the school bus, we'll have to take my dad's police car." Gwen gave his shoulder a gentle tug and pulled him towards school. Meanwhile, inside Osborn's biological laboratory, the Midtown High group was on a guided tour. A lecturer led them through the exhibits. They were currently in the spider display, which featured species from around the world alongside genetically modified and radioactively altered research specimens. Gwen peered into the large glass display case full of spiders and, curious, asked Peter, "Peter, what kind are these?" Peter set his camera down, stepped closer to the case, and studied the specimens Gwen was pointing out. "The biggest one is a tarantula," he said. "See how its body is covered in brownish hairs and those chelicerae. Its fangs are really thick. They're powerful. It's a venomous spider." Gwen tapped another spider with a 3-color pattern. "How about this one?" Peter squinted for a moment. "That looks like a Chinese wolf spider. Its most distinctive feature is the hair color. Those fine black, white, and yellow hairs give it that striped appearance." She scanned the case until her finger landed on one more. This one, Peter pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and leaned in. "That's the famous black widow. Very venomous. Notice the red hourglass marking on the underside of its abdomen." The teacher supervising the exhibit overheard and smiled with approval. "Parker explained them very well," she said. "He seems to have a real interest in biology. There aren't many students like you left who really care about learning. the teacher remarked with a sigh. Peter scratched the back of his neck. I'm not very strong, so I tend to read a lot, he said. The teacher smiled and steered them toward the next display case. You probably won't recognize the spiders in this one, Parker. Why's that? What's special about them? Gwen asked, leaning forward. Peter studied the specimens and shook his head. I don't recognize these. They look like products of Osborne Corporation's experiments. Exactly, the teacher said approvingly. Very perceptive, Parker. These spiders have been genetically altered or exposed to radiation. They're far removed from their original species. It's no surprise you wouldn't know them. Gwen peered into the case. The spiders were unusually beautiful. A few even seemed to glow faintly. Peter, look, they're gorgeous, she whispered. Come take some pictures of me with them, Gwen called. Okay. Peter Parker stepped back a few paces, found a good angle, and called out, Gwen, move a little to the right. Like this, she asked, adjusting. Yeah, bend your body a bit more. Like this? Perfect. Don't move. The camera clicked several times. Peter glanced at the shots on the screen and grinned. All right, Gwen, come take a look. Oh no, Gwen suddenly pressed a hand to her neck and gave a small, alarmed cry. She fumbled at her collar and pulled something away, a tiny spider, already dead, clutched in her fingers. Peter was at her side in an instant. What's wrong? Are you okay? Gwen extended her hand toward him, voice tight with worry. I think it bit me, Peter. Is it venomous? Peter took the spider, holding it up for a closer look, then turned to examine the spot on Gwen's neck. A fine strand of silk still clung to the wound. This looks like a modified spider, he said slowly. I don't know if it's venomous. I'll go find a staff member. They should know. With that, he started toward the event staff, worry creasing his face. The teacher from earlier heard the commotion and hurried over, visibly tense. What happened? He asked. These students had been under his supervision, and any accident would be his responsibility. Peter Parker stepped forward. Sir, Gwen was bitten by a spider. The teacher's voice went up. Bitten? What kind of spider? Is it venomous? I'm not sure, Peter said. It looked like one of the experimental specimens. He held the crushed spider out to the teacher for inspection. The teacher took the tiny carcass and examined it, then visibly relaxed, wiping sweat from his brow. At the same time, Gwen's father, who, as director of the New York police, had been watching from nearby, regained his composure and spoke up. It should be non-venomous, he said. I've checked on Osborne's display before. The experimental spiders they show here aren't venomous. They avoid exhibiting any venomous specimens because altering venom could create unpredictable toxins. Peter let out a relieved breath, but he didn't relax completely. Still, Mr. Bell, he said, addressing the teacher, we should take Gwen to see a staff member. Even non-venomous, those modified spiders could have unknown effects. Chapter 52. I became a mutant? No problem, that spider wasn't venomous. Just put an ice pack on it. If you're worried, we can give her a tetanus shot. The medical staff examined the bite on Gwen's neck and gave a reassuring verdict. Peter Parker and Teacher White both exhaled in relief. Peter, ever the worrier, turned to the nurse. Then give her the tetanus shot, just to be safe. Got it, the nurse agreed. Gwen nodded meekly. In that moment, Peter felt very dependable. As they left Osborne, Peter noticed Gwen staring off into space and fell into step next to her. Gwen, you okay? He asked, concern in his voice. She blinked and flushed a little. I'm just a bit hungry. Hungry? Let's get burgers. There's a place nearby. Heard even Iron Man likes their cheeseburgers, Peter said with a grin. Cheeseburger sounds good, Gwen replied. Her stomach tightened with hunger, and she agreed after a moment. Then, like a tiny electric buzz in her skull, a sudden, uneasy sensation prickled across her mind. Instinctively, she grabbed Peter. He'd been half a step ahead, trying to figure out which way to go, and yanked him back so he was firmly at her side. Ouch, what are you doing? Peter yelped as he stumbled, nearly falling into Gwen's arms. Bang! A flower pot crashed to the pavement where he had just been standing. Peter's eyes went wide. Gwen, thank you. If you hadn't grabbed me, that would have landed on me. Gwen blinked, equally startled. She hadn't even seen the pot fall. She just reacted and tugged him back on instinct. But, wow, you're really strong, Peter said, rubbing his shoulder. I feel like my shoulder's coming out of its socket. Really? Gwen looked at her hands, puzzled. She hadn't felt like she'd used much force. Peter was slim and always the target of Flash and the other bigger kids, but she'd never had to pull someone larger than herself like that before. For some reason, his weight had felt lighter under her grip, even stronger than Flash's usual shove. They didn't linger on it. After sweeping up the broken clay from the sidewalk, Peter led Gwen to the burger joint he remembered nearby. Once inside, Gwen popped the last tiny piece of cheeseburger into her mouth and signaled the waiter. "2 more, please," she said. Peter's eye twitched as he stared at the half-eaten burger in his hand. Gwen, meanwhile, had already finished 6 and was reaching for a 7th. "Peter, maybe I should pay," she said, glancing at his face. "You're spending a lot." He waved her off with a careless smile. "It's fine. I still have plenty left. We agreed I'd treat you. Besides, why are you suddenly eating so much?" Gwen flushed as she popped another bite into her mouth. "I don't know. I'm just really hungry. I can't stop." "Could it be from the scare earlier? Maybe it made you hungrier?" Peter offered. Gwen snorted. "No way. I was bitten by a spider. I'm not some nervous wreck." She wasn't afraid, she insisted. Peter only frowned, still puzzled. That night, the thought lingered with him. The next morning, Gwen swung her legs over the side of the bed and stretched and heard the sharp rip of fabric. Her pajama top had torn. She blinked in confusion. Those pajamas weren't that flimsy. Changing into fresh clothes, she went to the mirror to wash up, trying to make sense of the strange little mystery. Gwen let out a small scoff as she squeezed toothpaste onto the mirror. How strange. Then she saw something even stranger. When did these get bigger? She pinched the 2 mounds at her chest. They definitely hadn't been this large a few minutes ago. 5 minutes later, her bedroom looked like a storm had passed through it. She'd yanked the faucet off the sink and stuffed a towel into the exposed pipe. The bathroom door lay on the floor, torn from its hinges, and the doorknob was still clutched in her hand, useless. Her clothes were ripped into several pieces, shredded in a way that made it obvious they couldn't be put back together. How could this happen? Have I become a monster? She whispered to herself. Gwen was rattled. She didn't understand what was happening to her. Her strength had skyrocketed. She'd broken the door and pulled the faucet off like it was nothing, and her skin seemed to stick to things. A scrap of bedsheet hung from one foot as if glued there. Panic bubbled up. Could she be a mutant? Was some mutant power awakening inside her now? The idea made her even more uneasy. From a young age, she'd only ever heard negative things about mutants, and the more she thought about it, the more real the possibility seemed. Gwen didn't hate mutants. She had never been that kind of person, but she was terrified. Terrified that her ability might bring disaster down on her family. She pictured Peter. Peter was so smart, he could find a way out of this. She picked up a shirt and slipped it on slowly, careful this time not to tear it. With one hard tug, the strap finally slipped free from her wrist. Gwen wanted to go straight out the door, but she couldn't bring herself to risk frightening her parents. She moved instead to her bedroom window and peered out. Across the street at the Parker house, Peter was still in bed. He'd spent the whole day with Gwen yesterday and had no idea how she kept going. He was exhausted while she still seemed full of energy. He'd come home and collapsed, sleeping until now. Peter, Peter. A voice, distant and urgent, tugged at him like a hand on his sleeve. Half asleep, he thought, I must be dreaming. Did I just hear Gwen? Then the voice came again, closer and panicked. Peter, don't sleep. It's me, Gwen. Something big has happened. The pounding in the room sharpened. Peter blinked, forced his eyes open, and sat up. He was suddenly completely awake. A pale, ghostly figure was clinging to his window, staring straight at him. Ah! Peter Parker yelped. The figure smiled. Calm down, Peter. It's Gwen. Gwen? He forced himself to breathe and blinked. Up close, he could clearly see her. He crossed the room, opened the window, and demanded, Gwen, why are you outside my window? How did you get up so high? Gwen somersaulted through the open pane as nimbly as ever and dropped into his bedroom. She'd been here so many times, she knew the layout by heart. She moved a chair and sat facing him. Her cheeks had a faint flush as she said, a little embarrassed, Peter, even though I'm very familiar with your body, you should really put some clothes on. Peter glanced down and blushed himself. He was wearing only his underwear. He'd been too flustered earlier to bother dressing. He spun, grabbed his clothes off the bedside chair, and pulled them on as fast as he could. When he'd finished, he turned back to her. "Okay, but Gwen, why are you here? Why are you outside my window?" Gwen hesitated, looking unsure how to begin. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Peter, I think I've become a mutant." Peter pinched his chin and shook his head. "A mutant? No way." "Why not?" Gwen asked, puzzled. Peter put on an exaggerated expression. "I always thought mutants had green skin and fangs, like monsters. Gwen, you're still gorgeous. Definitely not one of those." Chapter 53, Arodes. When Peter called her pretty, Gwen couldn't help smiling, but she quickly sobered. "Okay, joking's over," she said. "I woke up this morning and my body has changed. I'm a lot stronger, and my hands and feet stick to things. Have I become a monster?" She didn't wait for an answer. Gwen set her palm flat on the kitchen table, concentrated for a second, and then lifted. The table came up with her hand as if glued there. Peter's eyes widened. "Wow, Gwen, you're— Peter, be serious," she snapped, rolling her eyes. He scratched the back of his head. "I was just trying to lighten the mood. You looked freaked out." Gwen glared. "Lighten the mood? This is serious." He couldn't resist a little teasing. "So, can you shoot webs now?" "Peter, I have superpowers, not a spider curse," she huffed, though a little of the tension left her voice. Peter's smile faded as he saw she was starting to calm down. "Panicking won't help. We need to think logically. Your new abilities, strength, adhesive hands and feet, they're a lot like a spider's. Remember that weird spider from yesterday? I think this might be connected to it." "Spider?" Gwen repeated, looking at him as if the idea had just lodged into her head. "It seems so. Peter, check the back of my neck." Gwen tilted her head and swept her golden hair aside so Peter could see clearly. He leaned in and stared. The wound that had been obvious yesterday was completely gone. Not even a scar remained. "How strange. It's gone," Peter said, baffled. Gwen frowned, thinking, could it be the mutation? "Could be," Peter answered. "Your overall fitness has improved so much that your recovery might have accelerated too. Wait, what about the spider?" He moved to the bookshelf and took down a small glass vial. Inside, the spider that had bitten Gwen the day before sat motionless. "We should study it," Peter said. At the Marvel Clash compound, Lion stepped off the training field and grabbed a bottle of water, gulping it down. Colossus followed him, shaking his head in amazement. "Lion, you're something else. You really are an agent. Your skills are incredible," Colossus said. Lion set the bottle down and grinned. "Colossus, you're a monster. We've been training together for ages, and you still don't break a sweat." Colossus shrugged. "I'm a mutant. My powers have boosted my endurance. It's not really comparable. But still, Lion, your ability is exceptional." "You nearly had me a few times," Colossus grumbled as they walked. "I swear I would have hit you if not for a few lucky accidents. Your reflexes are practically cheating." Leon laughed and shrugged, trying for modesty but unable to hide the smile tugging at his mouth. "Same to you." They left the training room together, talking about grabbing a break in the lounge. As they walked, Colossus glanced at Lion and said, "At this rate, you'll be a full member of the team before long." Lion pushed his hands behind his head and puffed out his chest. "I don't need any more training. I'm ready now," he said, half boastful, half teasing. Then something in Lion's peripheral vision caught his attention, a wall they'd passed countless times, but tonight it seemed different. "Colossus, was there a mirror there before?" he asked. Colossus stopped and followed Lion's gaze. "A mirror?" he echoed. They approached it together. The mirror looked ancient, its silver surface etched with strange designs that seemed to tug at the eye. The frame was set with odd gems that glittered even in the dim corridor light. Ornamental flourishes on either side of the frame formed a pair of watchful, almost lifelike eyes. Lion reached out, unable to tear his eyes away. "This isn't just an antique, is it?" he murmured. "It looks really old." Curious, Lion reached out and tapped the mirror with the back of his hand. Its surface behaved like water. There was a ripple at his touch. He jerked his hand back, worried he'd damaged an antique. Letters rose out of the silver glass, arranging themselves into a sentence. "I am Arodes, who knows everything. You may ask me a question." "A magic mirror," Lion said with a grin. "I always wanted one of these when I was a kid." Let's see." He struck a theatrical thinking pose and then pointed as if to present his question. "When did you appear on this wall?" The mirror answered by showing a scene. At first the view looked down from above, a high, sweeping perspective that made everything below feel small and oppressed. A figure moved along the corridor and came to the spot where Lion and Colossus were standing now. Then the viewpoint dropped to a normal eye level, and the person in the scene stepped fully into view, a young man wearing a monocle. "So that's the mirror's perspective," Lion said, suddenly enlightened. "No wonder it looked so strange." "So Amon put it here," Colossus whispered. Lion cocked his head. "Amon? Who's that?" "My brother," Colossus said, "and the owner of this company." Lion's face lit up like he'd discovered a secret city. He winked. "Colossus, I had no idea you had connections. Do me a favor sometime, huh?" The image in the mirror hadn't finished. A string of numbers floated across its surface. 8:32. "Is that the time the mirror was installed?" Lion said, impressed. "Smart mirror." The scene dissolved and the glass smoothed back into a liquid, watery sheen. Then words formed across it, clear and indifferent. "According to the principle of reciprocity, you must answer a question posed by me. If you lie or answer incorrectly, you will be punished." Lion laughed. "It even has a punishment section, and it's in red. How dramatic. What is the punishment? Docked pay?" He kept joking and bantering with Colossus as if it were a prank, but Colossus wasn't amused. From everything he'd seen of Amon, this was the sort of thing that very rarely ended in a joke. Words rippled across the surface of the erodes like ink spreading on water. "Lion Jones," the mirror read. "An accident a year ago brought you into contact with S.H.I.E.L.D.'s top agent, Black Widow. Attracted by her beauty and skill, you joined S.H.I.E.L.D. So tell me, have you ever fantasized about being pinned down on a bed and ravaged by Black Widow?" Lion's heart skipped. He blinked hard, staring at the reflected text as if it might rearrange into something less obscene. His mouth went dry. "How does it know that?" he whispered. "No, why would I answer that?" "Refusal to answer or lying will result in punishment," the Herodes replied without inflection. He swallowed and forced himself to be curt. "No, and I didn't join S.H.I.E.L.D. because of Black Widow. I joined to be a hero." He expected the mirror to let it go. Instead, fresh words unfurled across its glass. "I'm sorry. Incorrect answer. You lied." Lion barked a bitter laugh, trying to flatline the panic rising in his chest. "This mirror must be malfunctioning. Me, like that? Ha!" Before he could finish the forced joke, the Herodes flared. A white-hot bolt of lightning shot from its surface and slammed into him. Pain lanced through his body like a thrown spear. The room exploded into a smell of ozone and burned fabric as Lion crumpled to the floor, the laugh strangled into a cry. Lion's last coherent thought before blacking out was a single, desperate question. "I redistributed my luck to everyone around me, so why did I still get struck?" Colossus stared down at him, stunned. Lion lay on the ground, hair standing on end and clothes smoking slightly from the strike. The air still smelled of ozone. "Amon's playing a big game," Colossus muttered under his breath. "This shouldn't have happened." He crouched and checked Lion over. The burns and cuts were all superficial, singed skin, a few shallow marks where the current had passed. He should come to after a while. "Kid's got a hell of a constitution," Colossus said, more to himself than anyone else. Lifting Lion into his arms, he headed for the infirmary. As he walked, the question nagged at him. Why had Lion been hit at all? The whole company had been crawling with Amon avatars. Only a handful of people were outside the range of whatever ability Lion had used. It was starting to look like Lion had only thought he'd successfully redistributed his luck, that he'd been under an illusion of success. Chapter 54, Spider Totem. Amon's silhouette solidified beside Herodes in an instant. He had been watching how it was being used, and he approved. Herodes was working well. It was a device Amon had built during this period, a kind of information processor tuned to the strange metaphysics of the Marvel Universe. There was no spirit world here, exactly, but the universe did contain a patchwork of dimensions, pocket planes, and attached realms that recorded all manner of complex data. If those alternate spaces were treated like databases, Herodes was the processor that could comb through them, locate the necessary fragments of information, decode and assemble them, and present the results. It worked quickly and accurately, so long as the query didn't concern overly high-level secrets or data protected by special concealment. Herodes would answer questions at no charge, But Amon believed in reciprocity. Simply being a source of answers was dull. The real value came from a two-way exchange. Which questions Arodes would ask in return was entirely up to the device itself. Arodes' specialty was uncovering secrets. Its offensive power was limited. Still, it wasn't weak. It ranked Sequence 3, the equivalent of a Grade 1 sealed artifact. As Amon appeared, Arodes' outer surface shimmered, and a line of words formed across it. "Great Master, how was my performance?" the device asked. "Very good," Amon replied. "It's already very close to how I remember it." "Arodes is honored to satisfy, Master," the artifact answered. Amon adjusted Arodes' position and left Marvel Clash. He wandered the streets of New York without a clear destination, following nothing but a tug at the edges of his awareness. Somewhere in the city, a great disturbance in destiny had arisen. He couldn't immediately pinpoint its origin, so he let the currents of fate guide him and moved in the direction they pulled. Destiny was an intangible thing, imperceptible to ordinary people, and even harder to alter. Only cataclysmic events capable of rewriting the past sent ripples through it. A whole family slaughtered, someone dragged into high-level conflicts, things of that magnitude. The disturbance Amon was sensing now was vast. If the ripple in fate created when an ordinary person's entire family is wiped out was like dropping an effervescent tablet into a glass of water, this one was like detonating a nuclear bomb in the middle of an ocean. It wasn't just the intensity of the disturbance, it was the staggering breadth of its reach. Peter Parker walked up to a coffee shop and pushed the door open. The source of the problem was inside. "Gwen," he said, closing the distance, "I checked into it. The spider that bit you was a radiation-mutated specimen. It's dead now. But I'm friends with Harry Osborn, and through him we might be able to find another live spider. We could test it on a white mouse and see if that explains your mutation." Gwen thought of Harry. She and Peter had grown up together and had run into Harry a few times, but they weren't close. All she really remembered about him was that the wealthy heir had a messy personal life and a string of girlfriends. Gwen watched Peter's face and thought, "I hope he doesn't pick up bad habits from that friend of his." She stared so long that Peter waved a hand in front of her eyes. Gwen, are you spacing out? Did you hear what I just said?" "I'm listening. Didn't you say you were going to look for Harry?" Gwen snapped back, forcing herself to focus. Peter nodded. "Harry'll be back next week. We'll go find him when he gets in. I know an abandoned factory where no one goes. We can test your abilities there." "You want to test superpowers?" Gwen's eyes lit up. "You could come to my company. We've got specialized equipment." A shadow suddenly fell over their table. Peter looked up to see a friendly-looking young man approaching with a smile. Can I help you?" Peter asked, puzzled. The man returned the smile. "I heard you talking about superpowers and got curious. Thought I'd come over and introduce myself." He handed them a business card. "I'm Amon." Peter read the card and his eyes widened. "Marvel Clash? You're the boss of that new superhero company." Amon had heard of the company too. It had become quite famous recently. "Could you tell me about what happened?" "I'm very curious," he said. Under Amon's unusually strong charm and persuasiveness, Peter Parker and Gwen didn't suspect a thing. They readily agreed. "Sure," they answered. "A good swindler needs the gift of persuasion." Sequence 8 of the error pathway was precisely that, the swindler, and Amon, at the top of that sequence, had such mastery of rhetoric that even the most ordinary remark sounded entirely reasonable and convincing. He pulled up a chair and listened intently as Peter and Gwen recounted their experience. When they finished laying out what had happened and their theories, Amon nodded. "You suspect the spider caused Miss Stacy's mutation. Can I see it?" Peter produced a small glass box from his pocket and handed it over. "It's here, but it's already dead," he said. "That doesn't matter. Dead or alive, it's the same," Amon replied casually. He took the box, glanced at the spider, then returned it to Peter. "What a remarkable little creature," he murmured. "Aren't you going to test Miss Stacy's abilities?" "I'll take you to Marvel Clash to run some tests," Peter said. Gwen glanced at him and nodded. "Okay." Amon escorted Peter and Gwen to Marvel Clash's testing grounds, handed them off to one of his avatars, and went into a private room. He opened his right hand. Cradled in his palm was a faintly glowing spider, not a living creature but a temporal projection, a recorded echo of that spider. He concentrated, and another Amon avatar materialized beside him. The avatar cocked its head. "Master, you didn't summon me here to perform some weird experiment, did you? You'll disguise yourself and let that spider bite you," Amon replied. "That way we can link into the web and study the so-called spider totem." To everyone else, Spider-Man's abilities look like technology or the result of genetic mutation. In truth, Spider-Man is a mystic hero. His power stems from a spider totem, a faith-based, supernatural entity that seeks suitable hosts across the endless multiverse and bestows its power upon them. Most of those chosen become a spider hero. Normally, only one spider hero manifests per universe, and being bitten by a spider alone is not enough to guarantee it. Amon could use the Error Authority to make the spider totem perceive him as Spider-Man during its recognition, creating the necessary bond to probe its secrets. His avatar gave a brief nod, its form rippling as it took on Gwen Stacy's features. Appearance was the easiest thing to fake. Then it reached out and plucked a fragment of Gwen Stacy's destiny, the crucial move that made everything possible. Chapter 55, Totem of Amon. To fool the spider totem and trigger the error ability, a lot had to fall into place. The most important requirement was generating enough mystical resonance with Spider-Man, and of all things, the spider itself mattered most. Equally crucial was entangling Amon's fate with Gwen Stacy's. The little spider in Amon's hand stirred. It crawled slowly onto the arm of the Amon avatar, which had been reshaped to look exactly like Gwen Stacy. Then it opened its mouth parts and sank its fangs in. The monocles over both Amon's and the avatar's right eyes flared with a sudden harsh light. Error activated. The avatar instantly became indistinguishable from Gwen Stacy, not just in appearance, but in fate and memory. It now carried Gwen's experience of being bitten by a radioactive spider. Mystically, the avatar and Gwen overlapped, their similarities stacked until, for all intents and purposes, that Amon was Gwen Stacy. Before the avatar's eyes, layers upon layers of spiderwebs unfolded. They braided and stretched outward, interweaving until they seemed to bridge one world to the next. "Found it," Amon said, a smile curling at his lips as his vision doubled and layered, reality fracturing into overlapping threads. Door-shaped sigils flared in his eyes, logging everything they had seen. Then Amon shoved the avatar into the endless spiderweb it had been studying. The avatar's voice rang in his ears even as it tumbled away. "Original body, how rude," it protested. "Go explore thoroughly for me." Amon gave a low, amused chuckle. The pattern of the web, the way the spider totem had been built around it, was elegant. He replayed it in his mind. "Clever construction," he mused. "I could adapt the spider totem's design to build my own totem, but to do that I need a cornerstone, something to anchor the structure. Where would I find one?" He turned the problem over, tracing possibilities through the data the sigils had recorded. There were many paths, but no obvious cornerstone yet. He would need time and the right piece of fate. At a different test site, Gwen's spider sense flared so violently she almost dropped what she was holding. The warning vanished as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving an odd hollow behind. For a heartbeat, she felt disconnected from everything, as if the world itself had slid a little further away and she'd lost a thread of contact. The feeling was brief. Normal perception snapped back almost immediately. Still, she knew what it meant. That short, uncanny numbness was the after-effect of having a portion of one's fate stolen. If a person's fate were taken completely, they would become fated, cut off from the real world, their consciousness adrift as their bodies slowly withered away. Ordinary people never felt the theft happen. It was too subtle. Only those with heightened senses, or unusual luck, registered the theft before it was too late. Gwen rubbed her palm, shaken more by the implication than by the sensation. A fragment gone. It wasn't catastrophic, not yet, but it was a warning. Somewhere nearby, something had been taking pieces of fate. That had to be investigated. And if Amon was right about totems needing cornerstones, then the theft might be connected to whatever he was plotting. A cold whisper slid through Gwen's spider sense, images and words with no source. They will only find that traces of their past have disappeared, and people they know no longer recognize them. Then the thief who stole your fate will replace you. Everyone will see him as you, and you will die in despair. Gwen forced a nervous laugh and drew 2 sharp breaths. Peter, standing beside her, frowned. Gwen, what's wrong? Was the test too intense? She smoothed down her suit, rubbed her chest once, and shook her head. No, the intensity is fine. It just felt very strange for a second, like the world had abandoned me. Peter's eyes flicked to the barbell she was holding as if it were nothing. It looked impossibly heavy, hundreds of kilograms, but she held it casually. He blinked, more puzzled than alarmed. If the equipment here isn't right for you, we actually have instruments specifically for strength-based heroes. Follow me. Klein, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward and led them toward another testing rig, his tone all professional concern as they moved off. Peter couldn't help but blurt out when he saw the contraption in front of them. Is that the sword in the stone? A huge platform dominated the room, a giant sword sunk into its center, with only the hilt exposed, the rest of the blade buried inside the pedestal, just like the legend. Gwen glanced at it and asked, So I just stand on it and pull this out? Klein nodded. It's a pulling force tester, modeled after the sword in the stone. Stand on the platform and pull straight up. The gauge on the side records the peak output. It measures forces from 1 ton up to 100 tons, more than enough to test your strength. 100 tons. That's ridiculous, Peter muttered, unable to picture anyone with that kind of power. Gwen hopped onto the platform, rubbed her hands together, and gripped the hilt. With a teasing grin, she said, If I pull it out, does that mean King Arthur was actually a woman? Peter smirked without thinking. Then what about Lancelot? Did he love King Arthur but couldn't have her? Peter muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Klein snorted. Or maybe King Arthur was just a big eater and swallowed Great Britain whole. Your unofficial history is getting out of hand, Peter said, half laughing. Gwen tuned them out. She inhaled deeply, planted her feet, and pulled up with steady force. The massive sword in the stone shifted a little. Peter watched the instrument readout with wide eyes. 1 ton, 2 tons, 3, 7, 9, 14. The numbers climbed in jagged steps. What the? How can the reading be that high? Peter rubbed his eyes. Is this even human? Gwen grunted. The platform under her creaked as she hauled another section free. The meter spiked sharply, then eased back. The peak held at 43 tons. Gwen rotated the blade once to get a better grip, hopped off the platform, and came over to Peter. How was it? She asked, curious. Peter squeezed her slender arm, still stunned, and managed, It's not even that thick. How did you unleash so much power? Klein stepped forward and explained calmly. Her normal output is about 14 tons. When she pushes herself, it spikes to 43 tons. She's only just awakened these abilities. There should be significant growth as she adapts. Peter Parker swallowed and jabbed a nervous thumb at Gwen. Gwen, don't hit me the way you used to. I'm pretty sure you could actually kill me now. Gwen crossed her arms and snorted. Humph, that depends on how well you behave. Klein glanced between them. Okay, strength testing's complete. Next we'll check speed and reaction time, then endurance and any special abilities. When Amon returned to the testing site a little later, the assessments were already finished. Looks like you finished the tests. How did she do? He asked. Peter's grin was almost giddy. It's insane. Her strength peaked at 43 tons, her reaction speed is 36 times that of a normal person, and her one-handed adhesion, she can hold over 10 tons with one hand. She's practically Superman. Amon smiled and turned to Gwen. Those are excellent numbers, Miss Stacy. Would you be interested in signing with our company? Compensation would be on par with a top-tier celebrity. Gwen blinked, surprised. Be a superhero? I'm still a student, and my father might not agree, Gwen protested. Don't worry, the other answered. We work with the NYPD. Your father will understand once we explain. And if you're worried about issues with your identity, we can handle that. Little Kay, give her a demonstration. Klein pouted, then, following the original body's intention, his form shifted. In an instant, another Peter Parker stood before Gwen. Chapter 56. Once again, a Rhodes. What kind of ability is this? It actually became exactly like me, even my mannerisms. The man who had been impersonating Peter Parker laughed. Then he relaxed his features and shifted back into Klein's face. This is a device every official superhero in Marvel Clash is issued, Klein explained. It can alter your appearance into someone whose build isn't too different from yours, and it can even mimic your temperament. The whole point is to protect a hero's secret identity so their normal life isn't disrupted. There's actually technology like that? Incredible, Peter Parker said, eyes wide. Gwen considered for a moment before replying. I hadn't thought about it. Let me think it over and get back to you. Amon smiled and waved it off. No pressure. We're a legitimate company. We won't force anyone. Just tell us when you've decided. They turned to leave. As Peter watched them go, Amon called back. Mr. Parker, your luck hasn't been great lately. Be careful and hang on to the business card I gave you. Peter blinked in surprise. You can read luck? He thought. Are you a charlatan? But he didn't say it out loud. That would have been too rude. He only nodded and told Amon, thanks for the reminder. I'll be careful. On the way to the Marvel Clash lobby on the first floor, Peter Parker noticed an antique-looking silver mirror hanging in the corridor. It looked exotically old. Is this an antique? He murmured. They just hung it casually in the hall. These people must be loaded. He sighed with admiration and, almost without thinking, reached out to feel the carved patterns. The moment his fingers neared the surface, a buzzing, unpleasant sensation ran through him. Gwen was quicker to react. She instantly knew where it came from. Wait, Peter, she shouted. Gwen lunged to pull his hand back, but his fingers were already inches from the glass. Hearing her call, he turned his head, and at that moment his hand brushed the mirror. Gwen, what did you say? He asked, surprised. Gwen stared, equally surprised. She didn't know why she had shouted. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and pale letters spread across it. I am the all-knowing Erodes. You may ask me a question, the mirror said. Oh, words are appearing on the mirror, Gwen exclaimed, pointing at the faint letters forming on the glass behind them. Is this an AI? Peter guessed, leaning closer to read the pale lines. A man with a face that looked as if it had been dusted in charcoal stepped forward, grinning. Ha, kid, you're in for some fun. Gwen scowled. Who are you? Did you just crawl out of a coal pile? The charcoal-faced man straightened his jacket, smoothed his fluffy hair, and announced, Lion Jones, provisional superhero, and this mirror is very interesting. Peter frowned. What do you mean by that? What's wrong with the mirror? Lion shrugged, casual. Nothing's wrong. Just ask it a question and you'll see. He smoothed his hair again, muttering under his breath, when will this damned afro finally lay flat? Peter rolled his eyes. A guy who pretends to be mysterious, he thought. He turned to Erodes, looking for help, and tried to pick a question. Why would that guy, Leon, say something like that? He asked aloud. Is there something wrong with you? Someone snapped. The surface of Erodes shifted, flickering until an image formed. A good-looking young man and a stocky companion were walking down a corridor. They stopped in front of the mirror, and the handsome one reached out to touch it, something like a Peter Parker moment. The two of them laughed together. Then the handsome man suddenly grew agitated and whispered something to his friend. Without warning, a bolt of lightning struck. The young man crumpled to the floor. Erodes zoomed in until his face filled the display, charred and blackened by the lightning. It was Lion, the same Lion who had been smirking moments before. Lion's smile vanished. He hadn't expected his own image to appear there, much less in such a humiliating state. Lines of text scrolled across Erodes' surface. Lion Jones lied when answering the question. According to the rules, he should be punished. So that's it, Gwen muttered, loud enough for Lion to hear. No wonder the charcoal-faced guy kept gloating. A faint flush crept across Lion's ash-gray face. He wanted to slip away while the others were distracted, but his curiosity won out. He strained to hear what Erodes would ask this young man and forced his embarrassment down. Erodes' mirror surface shifted again. Pale letters slid into view. According to the principle of reciprocity, you must answer one of my questions. If you answer incorrectly or lie, you will be punished. Here it comes, Peter thought, bracing himself. He already had an idea what the punishment might be. The charcoal-streaked man beside him was living proof. Still, he kept his voice steady. Ask. Erodes' words were clinical. Peter Parker, because your beloved has gained superpowers and become more outstanding, do you feel inferior to her? Do you believe you are unworthy of her? Peter blinked, thrown for a moment, though he did not lose his composure. Gwen, however, couldn't sit still. She searched his face with a complicated expression, wondering silently if Peter was feeling self-conscious. Peter inhaled slowly, met her eyes, and answered with a casualness he didn't entirely feel. "Gwen, I'm fine. With a friend that beautiful and perfect since childhood, anyone would feel a little inferior. That's normal. You don't have to worry about me." Gwen's voice wavered. Her eyes were moist. "Peter, you're right. Answer, correct." The mirror's voice was thin and faded, like something barely more than a whisper. Lion, standing to one side, bristled. Something about it felt wrong. Why wasn't the mirror humiliating them the way it had with others? Why was it encouraging them? He seethed inwardly. It felt like the mirror was deliberately singling him out. He'd been too ashamed to face Colossus after what had happened earlier. And now, of all things, the mirror was practically playing matchmaker for those two. Lion couldn't bear to stay. He slipped away, one hand trying to hide his charcoal-smudged afro. Peter reached out toward the glass again. This time Gwen grabbed his wrist, pulling him back, bewildered. "Peter, why are you even touching that thing?" she whispered. "Didn't you see what happened to that charcoal-faced guy? He got struck by lightning. His face was blackened. It's a magic mirror." She held him fast. Peter couldn't wrench his hand free. 43 tons of strength, that's insane, someone exclaimed. Peter Parker sighed inwardly and said, "I'm beginning to think this mirror erodes can read thoughts I haven't even spoken aloud. Maybe it can tell us what gave you this power. It might not have been the spider at all. Something else could be responsible. We don't know whether that's dangerous. If the mirror can reveal the cause, we can root out any hidden threat before it's too late." Chapter 57. Nick Fury visits again. "No, that's too dangerous." Gwen shook her head, voice firm. "If you can't answer the questions it asks, you could get yourself killed. I'm not letting you go." Peter fell silent, seeing she meant it. He didn't press the matter. They left the Marvel Clash event together, and Gwen checked her watch as they walked. "We still have half a day of vacation," she said. "What are we going to do now?" Peter grinned and produced 2 movie tickets from his pocket, waving them in front of her. "Guess what this is?" Gwen took a ticket and peered at it. The title read, Transformer 1 Iron Man. "Where did you get tickets to this?" she asked. "I heard it's based on Tony Stark's life, and that Iron Man actually appears in it. The alien robots are supposed to look real. Tickets are supposed to be nearly impossible to get. Did Harry give them to you?" "No way," Peter said with a laugh. "Harry's still out of the country. I didn't get them from him. They were handing them out at Marvel Clash, freebie giveaways." "I heard they're the producers of this movie," Peter said. After a beat, he added, "So let's go to the cinema this afternoon. Everything we needed to do is finished. The ability tests that were going to take forever got wrapped up early thanks to the equipment from Marvel Clash. We don't get the spider for a few more days, so there's no rush." "Okay, let's go then," Gwen agreed without hesitation. "I'm really curious about the film." Tony Stark was back at his base, bent over schematics and test rigs, trying to figure out how to give the Autobots flight capability. Right now their mobility was pitiful. They could only run on the ground, a major disadvantage against the Decepticons. Ratchet noticed Tony's frown and spoke up. "Tony, if you're worried about our mobility, I think I can fix it." Tony snorted. "You can fix it? Ratchet, do you mean you can install flight systems on the Autobots? If that was possible, why didn't you do it already? Not being able to fly is a big weakness." Ratchet tilted his head and shook it slightly. "Tony, that's not what I mean. My approach is different from yours. You keep talking about adding flight systems. I'm talking about improving mobility, period," Tony said. Ratchet tilted his head. "Is there a difference? Isn't flying just flying you there?" Tony asked, genuinely puzzled. Ratchet moved to the control console, extended an interface from his massive arm, and plugged it in. The screen flickered, then a 3-dimensional model of a device filled the display. Tony leaned forward. "What's that?" Ratchet tapped the model a few times. "A ground bridge. Think of it as a simplified space bridge, short-range spatial teleportation." Tony blinked. You guys have teleporters? How short is short range?" Ratchet's tone was matter-of-fact. "Short as in within a planet, not for jumping between stars." Tony's eyes widened. "That's short to you? With this thing we could be anywhere on Earth in an instant." Why didn't you build these before? Ratchet scratched the metal of his head and gave a rueful shrug. Tony, building a ground bridge takes time and a lot of foundational equipment and the right infrastructure to anchor the endpoints. When we first showed up on Earth, we were thrown straight into fighting the Decepticons, Tony said. There was never any time to build it, and the gear we had then wouldn't have supported it anyway. Now that things have calmed down, I've upgraded some of the basic equipment. I can finally start construction. Then what are you waiting for? Came the impatient reply. Show me the schematics, explain the principles, and let's get building. Tony's eyes lit up. He could hardly contain himself. Before he could move, Jarvis flickered into being, data streams converging until the AI's form materialized in the lab. Sir, Jarvis announced, S-Shield Director Nick Fury is here again. Tony's smile vanished. He frowned. What does he want? He still had a poor opinion of the man. Fury always talked about protecting the world, but when New York was under attack by the Decepticons, he'd been nowhere to be seen, holed up in a safe house while everyone else was on the front lines. Accompanying him is a female agent, Jarvis continued, the same agent who delivered the fighter jet, codename Black Widow. She is carrying a box. It appears to be addressed to you, sir. Tony raised an eyebrow. For me? He isn't trying to bribe me, is he? He really picked a bold way to do it. Tony muttered to himself for a beat, then called out to the house system. Jarvis, let them in. I want to find out what that bald egg wants. Jarvis excused himself and, a moment later, ushered Nick Fury and Natasha Romanoff through the entrance. True to form, Tony stepped around Fury and turned straight to Natasha with a grin. Hey, beautiful, he said. Stop following this bald egg. Come work for me. I'll pay you double. Being an agent's got no future. Fury's composure cracked for a fraction of a second. His expression went flat at the interruption. He clenched his jaw inwardly, ill-mannered Stark, but forced a neutral exterior. Natasha only smiled. Heh, Stark, I'm fine. I see you need an assistant right now. I'm excellent at being an assistant. I just don't know if your secretary would approve. Pepper, Tony said, stroking his chin and pretending to ponder gravely. That could be a problem. Fury blinked, then pushed past his irritation and stuck to the reason for the visit. Tony Stark, he said in the low, measured tone that made people listen. Palladium poisoning isn't pleasant. You can't fix it by yourself, but S-Shield has a solution. That little light bulb of yours isn't exactly environmentally friendly, Nick Fury said, testing the line with a smug curl of his lip. He believed he'd found Tony Stark's weak spot and basked in it. Tony's face, however, flickered into an expression Fury couldn't read. Internally, Tony thought, this bald-headed hack's got a mole feeding him ancient gossip. Pathetic. Then he burst out laughing. Ha! Baldy, you think you've got dirt on me? Tony guffawed, leaning back in his chair. That's cute. You're like a kid showing off to his parents. Fury's jaw tightened, his expression darkened. Stark, what are you talking about? He asked, voice flat. Tony crossed his left leg over his right and settled deeper into his composure, every inch the arrogant genius. You're seriously underestimating me, he said. Do you honestly think I wouldn't have anticipated something as trivial as an energy source? Consider it handled. Fury went still, incredulous. Handled? Howard's things are still in my custody. How did you get a new element without... Tony's smile dropped. His eyes narrowed, and the casual edge in his voice vanished. Hey, why are you bringing my father into this? Chapter 58. Even thoughts are stolen. Stark, Fury said, calm as ever. Your father, Howard Stark, was one of S-Shield's founders. By that logic, you're half S-Shield yourself. Fury felt the initiative shift back into his hands. Tony muttered under his breath, new element, S-Shield. Then something clicked for him, and he let out a scornful laugh. He left me clues to the new element, and you people hid them. Now you want to use them as leverage. Real classy, egghead, using my father's work against me. Fury didn't flinch at the accusation. He kept his tone steady. It's a fair trade. You become our technical consultant, help us open cooperation channels with the Autobots, and I'll give you the clues to the new element. Tony sneered. That's a nice thought, but I, Tony Stark, don't get played. I've already solved the problem. I don't need S-Shield's help. Go home and keep dreaming. Fury held Tony's gaze with his one eye for a long beat, then looked away. Tony Stark, he said quietly, Stubbornness won't save you. I'll wait for the day you come looking for me. Fury didn't believe for a second that Tony Stark could independently discover and synthesize a new element. Not even Howard Stark had managed that. He gave Natasha a curt nod. Time to go. She said nothing, lifted the box, and fell into step behind him. Goodbye, beautiful, Tony called, raising his left hand in a casual wave. Natasha froze, surprised that Tony would be so polite. She turned and returned the gesture, lifting her right hand to wave. When she set her hand back on the box, something felt off. The box suddenly seemed lighter. She glanced at Tony, still waving, then at Fury, who was walking ahead with a dark expression. Just as she was about to say something about the change, the thought slipped away, and with it the impression of the box's lightness. Everything was as normal again. She watched the two of them leave while Tony bounced a notebook and a videotape that had appeared in his left hand and laughed. That agent is pretty capable. She noticed the anomaly the moment I moved. I almost got caught. Tony had already given Natasha a casual wave and started to walk away when he slid his left hand up to the watch on his wrist. The Allspark gauntlet, disguised as an ordinary timepiece, hummed to life. With a flick of its field, he lifted several useful items out of the box without anyone feeling a thing. The gauntlet not only detected and plucked out what was valuable, it had also siphoned off the prick of suspicion that had been gathering in Natasha's mind. By the time she turned back, nothing looked out of place. Ratchet peered at the assortment of objects in Tony's hands. "Tony, did you take your father's relics?" Tony bristled at the word. "Not steal, Ratchet. Those were mine to begin with. They were just being stored by other people for a while. I'm reclaiming them." He laid the items on the table, an old notebook, a battered videotape, and a few other curios. The Allspark had already flagged the ones it considered important. Tony tapped the watch, watching the tiny display cluster the results for him. "This thing can tell what's valuable," he explained. "It sorts, it pulls, and it can even mask the sort of tingle someone like Natasha gets when something's off. Handy, right?" He flipped open the notebook and held the tape up to the light. "Do you think the secrets about that new element are hidden in here?" he asked Ratchet. "Forget the ground bridge for a minute. I have a feeling this element is more important. Come help me study it." Ratchet studied the pages and the spools, then nodded. Tony's excitement was contagious. The possibilities in that battered tape and scrawled notes suddenly looked like the key to something far bigger than an arcane transport device. Meanwhile, in Harlem, Peter Parker and Gwen walked down the street, still buzzing from the movie they'd just seen. "That was so cool," Peter said, grinning. "It had more impact than any Hollywood blockbuster." Peter Parker said, eyes bright with excitement. Gwen nodded. "Yeah, the shots didn't look like special effects at all. They looked like real footage. They say it's based on a true story, Tony Stark's own experience, and that the Transformers in it are real," Peter added. "By the way, why is it called Transformers 1 Iron Man? Are they planning a whole series?" They walked on, trading theories and laughing, when the chatter died off. Up ahead the street was a swirl of activity, barricades, uniforms, and people pressed against the sidewalk. The opposite side of the road had been cordoned off. Curious, they moved closer and asked a middle-aged man standing nearby, "Excuse me, what's going on?" The man, patient and eager to explain, answered, "About 10 minutes ago, the military showed up and declared this whole block a military operation zone. I even saw tanks and helicopters roll in." "Tanks?" Peter exclaimed. "Is something big happening?" "Peter, let's get out of here." "No, sir," Gwen said, tugging at his sleeve. "Now." "I've got a bad feeling," Gwen said, tugging at Peter Parker's sleeve. "Let's get out of here." "Leave. It's already swarming with the military. We probably won't see anything anyway," Peter replied, and started to follow her. Gwen had turned first and was heading down a different path when a low, familiar hum started at the base of her skull. Her spider sense, her warning, flared. Instantly she spun back and yanked Peter out of the way, pulling him clear of where they'd been standing. "Gwen, what's wrong with?" Peter began, but he never finished. A burning car came hurtling into the exact spot they'd just vacated, slamming into the barricade and exploding in a spray of metal and flame. An older man, an uncle who had been watching the commotion, and several others who'd been standing nearby were struck. The scene was horrific, bodies and debris scattered across the street. Peter froze, his eyes wide with shock. He'd never seen anything like it. The crowd around them erupted into screams and chaos as people scattered. Gwen swallowed the bile rising in her throat, forced herself to breathe, and hauled Peter toward the corner of the street where they could watch without being in the crush. They were both panting, not from running, but from shock and a cold, ragged fear. What's happening? So many people. They're dead. Peter Parker blurted, his voice tight with panic. Gwen hesitated, eyes wide. I think I saw a giant, a sickly yellow monster. It had these huge bony spikes all over its body. A monster? A mutant? Peter asked instinctively. Mutants shouldn't be that terrifying, should they? Gwen didn't think it was a mutant. She craned her neck around the corner and froze. The creature was charging straight at them. Without thinking, she spun back, scooped Peter up, and sprang into motion. They ran up the side of the block, bouncing between walls in a fluid, practiced rhythm until they landed on the roof of a nearby building. Behind them, the yellow behemoth slammed into the wall they had just been leaning against. The structure crumpled in thunderous crashes. The monster ripped a car from the street and threw it aside, then smashed through more buildings as it rampaged. Between roars and the grinding of concrete, it kept shouting over and over, a single word that cut through the chaos. Hulk! Where's the Hulk? Peter Parker grumbled, still half reclining in Gwen's arms. Is that thing here to get revenge or what? He couldn't help it. When things got tense, sarcastic complaints were his reflex. Gwen glanced down at him, a faint smile and worry both in her eyes. Not far away, in the Marvel Clash Tower, Cyclops, Scott Summers, was still at his post when an urgent message came through. There's a monster rampaging in Harlem, the bulletin said. The military can't hold it back. Scott repeated the report under his breath, weighing the words. Could this be the company's first official mission? He knew one thing for certain. With the military involved, it wouldn't be easy. Chapter 59, Wolverine vs. Abomination. A knock sounded on the office door. Scott opened it to find Klein standing there with a polite smile. Captain Scott, Klein said, I assume you've heard. There's a monster tearing through Harlem. It's time for your team to deploy. I've already taken care of the personnel. Already arranged? Efficient, Scott replied, eyebrow raised. He followed Klein down to the operations hall. Liana, Phoenix, Colossus, and a darker-skinned Leon, now sporting an afro, were already assembled. Scott paused at the sight of Leon. He'd seen the kid before, but not like this. How had his skin darkened and his hair changed? Leon gave an awkward, sheepish smile. Scott didn't dwell on it. The question that mattered was obvious. Where's Wolverine? Liana piped up, using the nickname she'd picked up from Amon's influence. Uncle Wolf went out this evening. I think he's at a bar. That loafer, Scott muttered, taking the chance to grumble about Logan. On the operations screen, footage faded in, showing a hulking yellow-brown monstrosity rampaging through the streets of Harlem. Klein briefed them crisply. The monster Abomination, real name Emil Blonsky, was transformed after being injected with an incomplete military super-soldier serum and then contaminated with the Hulk's serum. His baseline strength tops 80 tons and can spike to around 100 tons in short bursts. He can jump enormous distances, up to 2 kilometers in a single bound. His defenses are extreme. His body can take direct hits from cannon fire. The only things likely to pierce him are Wolverine's adamantium claws and Ileana's lightsaber. Keep that in mind. Where did you get that information? Jean, Phoenix, asked, clearly surprised. The Abomination just showed up. How do you already know all this? Klein smiled. Trust our intelligence division. They changed into their uniforms and prepared to move out. Leon fitted a mask over his face. As the device settled, it covered the skin that had been blackened by lightning. The surface shifted and smoothed, restoring him to the way he'd looked before the strike. Even his unruly curls returned to their former shape as the mask completed its work. This thing really works. Leon studied his reflection, smiling at the handsome face staring back at him. He nodded with satisfaction. Everyone seemed to have one of these devices, but the X-Men had no intention of using them. They weren't masked heroes, their identities didn't need hiding, and none of them were so disfigured that they required a cosmetic fix. A gleaming silver jet waited on the tarmac. It wasn't the X-Men's plane, but a Boeing provided by Marvel Clash for transportation, one of several aircraft assigned to the same task. Alongside Cyclops and the rest of the team, a group of Marvel Clash crew members, cameras in hand, stood ready to document the superhero's movements. Wolverine, meanwhile, considered himself unlucky. Bored, he had wandered into a bar for a drink. When a commotion spilled out into the street, his curiosity drew him to the scene. He caught sight of a towering figure in yellow just as a flying car careened through the area. The vehicle slammed into him and pinned him against a wall. It took him a long, bloody effort to wrench himself free. If his skeleton hadn't been adamantium and his healing factor as strong as it was, he'd have been nothing but Wolverine shards. Instead, he spat a mouthful of wood splinters and glass onto the pavement, shook himself off, and stepped back into the street. He was going to teach that yellow-brown monstrosity a lesson. The creature hadn't gone far, still tearing through cars and bellowing the name Hulk between blows. Wolverine's hands dropped to his sides. With a soft click, the adamantium claws slid from his knuckles and caught the streetlight, casting a hard, white gleam in the night. He flexed, hunched forward, and charged like a wolf. Abomination kept smashing the road, clearly trying to draw Bruce Banner out to force the Hulk to show himself. Wolverine didn't bell. A being that powerful would simply vanish. He lunged, intent on getting up close. "Ow! My ass!" Abomination suddenly yelped. It felt like something the size of a finger was poking at him mercilessly. "You damned bug!" Abomination whipped his head around and found a spiky-haired man clinging to his back, claws sliding along his spine as if scratching an itch. Wolverine held on, blades bared, grinning through the chaos. Wolverine's eyes met Abomination's. His animal instincts flared. Something terrible was coming. He pushed off with his legs, trying to put distance between them, but a huge yellow hand closed over him. Wolverine tried to block, but the grip was beyond anything he'd felt, like a man trying to stop a speeding truck. He was trapped, the hand squeezed. For a moment he thought he'd be crushed. His adamantium-laced skeleton held, though. His bones wouldn't break. Flesh and muscle were torn and bloodied across his body, but his healing factor would knit it back in seconds. Abomination stared, baffled. He knew the strength in his own grip. He could crush a car into a ball of metal. But he couldn't crush this one man. It was like a soldier trying to crush a wrench. "A stubborn lump of iron," he growled to himself. Unable to squash Wolverine, Abomination hauled him up with that massive right hand and, as if throwing a javelin, hurled him toward a nearby building. Wolverine slammed into the wall with bone-rattling force. Gwen and Peter were still watching the chaos below from an upstairs window when something streaked overhead and slammed into the building, making the whole structure shudder. Peter peered out, then turned to Gwen. "Did something just fly by?" Gwen nodded. "Yes, a man. A super-powered somebody. He was fighting that monster down there." Her vision, sharpened by the mutation, had picked out the fight between Wolverine and the Abomination. They hurried down to where the impact had landed. The military had already evacuated the residents of the building. Otherwise, Wolverine's crash would almost certainly have caused casualties. He was jammed into the wall in the middle of the stairwell, half buried in masonry. Wolverine was trying to free himself, but the Abomination had pinned him in tight. He couldn't pull out. A pleasant female voice called down, "Sir, do you need some help?" Wolverine glanced up. A young blonde girl was crouched nearby, looking at him, the one who had spoken. He snorted. "What help's a little girl gonna give me? If that kid over there were stronger, he might be useful." "Both of you, get out of the way. Don't let me hurt you," Wolverine barked. Gwen ignored him, pouting, and put her hand on his shoulder. Wolverine blinked. He was about to snap. "What are you doing, kid?" when a huge force pushed through his shoulder. With the sickening sound of plaster and brick giving way, Gwen hauled him free from the wall. Wolverine was speechless. He never would have guessed the girl had that kind of strength. The sensation she'd given him just now was oddly like the one he'd felt from that yellow-brown monster. "Who are you people?" he asked, still uneasy. Peter lifted a battered shopping bag. "We're just ordinary people who were passing by," he said. "The monster attacked us, and we hid in this building. Then we ran into you after you were thrown here." He opened the bag to show the ruined contents, soggy, unrecognizable blobs where snacks had been. These were the snacks Gwen and I bought. They all turned into mush because of that thing. They were all my favorites. Chapter 60, Beauty and the Beast. A normal person. Wolverine barked, incredulous. What kind of ordinary person had that kind of strength? Boom, boom. A series of heavy impacts rattled the building. The three of them moved to the gaping hole Wolverine had ripped in the wall and peered out. "It's the military," Peter Parker said. Armored vehicles rolled into the street, soldiers sprawling out around them. Some carried rifles, others hauled rocket launchers. An incoming rocket streaked toward the abomination. He caught it in one massive hand, grinning as he slammed it into his own chest. The warhead flared and spat fire, but he simply brushed the flames off as if they were nothing, unhurt. "This is insane. A rocket launcher can't even hurt him," Peter snapped. Wolverine only nodded. He knew all too well how tough the monster's hide was. Even his adamantium claws could barely make a scratch. "Oh no, the monster's heading for the crowd," Gwen cried. With a roar, he tore the military vehicles to pieces and charged toward Broadway, where the street was still packed with people the army hadn't managed to clear. "I'm going to help." Gwen's words were urgent. She wanted to drop straight down into the street and start evacuating people. "Don't go, it's too dangerous." She turned to Peter Parker. "Peter, I know you're worried about me, but you should know my father is the New York Police Commissioner. He taught me that with great power comes great responsibility. Now that I have powers, I can't just hide here while a monster attacks civilians. I can stop him." Peter knew Gwen. Nothing he said would change her mind. He sighed and nodded. "Just don't take him on directly. Get the people out of there. We're practically next to Marvel Clash. The other heroes should be on their way. You don't need to do anything more than evacuate." "All right, Peter. Don't be like my mom. I'm not reckless. I won't go in head first." Gwen gave him a brief, determined look, then ran along the side of the building, launched herself off the wall, and leaped toward the abomination and the crowd. As Gwen's figure disappeared into the skyline, Peter Parker suddenly had a thought and turned to Wolverine, puzzled. "You're a superhero, too. Why aren't you going after that monster?" Wolverine, his face lined and tired, shrugged. "Kid, I can't fly. I'm waiting for the elevator." He jabbed a finger toward the elevator doors. Peter scratched his head. "Wait, superheroes have to wait for elevators, too?" "Damn it," Wolverine muttered. "The elevator's stuck on the 9th floor. That impact back there must have fried it." "Then take the stairs with me," Wolverine added. "The elevator's busted." "All right." Peter glanced up at the floor indicator by the entrance and winced. "But this is the 23rd floor." He was already mourning his knees. Meanwhile, Gwen kept moving, vaulting across rooftops, weaving through fire escapes and leaping gaps with fluid parkour until she reached the area where Abomination was rampaging. She slipped into a shop the creature had smashed open, found a large mask that would cover most of her face, and pulled her hoodie up over it. She didn't want the whole world finding out she had powers. Outside, Abomination was tearing through the crowd and wrecking everything in sight, striking out indiscriminately at people and property. He sent cars and street fixtures flying like a child, knocking over toy blocks. Buildings and vehicles overturned with the same casual ease. Gwen stayed close to Abomination's back, using the monster as cover, then darted out in quick, bounding strides to reach people who'd frozen in place from terror. She grabbed them and hustled them to what she judged a safe spot. The pedestrians she pulled away were still in shock. One moment they felt a hand on their shoulder, the next they were being dragged out of danger. "Run down the street. This place isn't safe. Move," Gwen shouted, urging them to go, even though they were barely aware of what was happening. She didn't linger with the stunned survivors. Taking them one by hand would be too slow. She needed something that could move people faster. Her eyes swept the wreckage. A shattered storefront glass wall caught her attention. A safety rope for high-rise window cleaning hung from the frame, swaying in the chaos. She didn't bother wondering where the window washers had gone. Gripping both ends, she yanked. The rope didn't budge. It was solid. Gwen tied a chunk of concrete to the end of the rope as a weight, then flicked her wrist and sent it sailing up toward the streetlight above the Abomination. The rope caught. She sprang, grabbed it, and swung across the street. She'd been on the school dance troupe for years. Her flexibility and coordination were already excellent. After the enhancement, everything was sharper, her timing, her balance, so swinging felt as natural as breathing. As she arced through the air, she thought, half aloud, maybe I should ask Peter to help me make a compact grappling device. With his knack for gadgets, he could definitely build one. Down below, a man in an electrician's uniform was frozen in place, just as one of the abomination's thrown cars hurtled toward him. The rope lanced around his waist and yanked him out of the car's path. Max Dillon's head swam. When the dizziness passed, he realized he'd been dragged clear to the other side of the street. Over the crash and shouts he heard her. "It's dangerous here. Get out quickly." She saved me and warned me, Max thought, staring at her back as she moved on to the next person in need. Her figure burned into his memory before he turned and ran for safety. Gwen had no idea someone had seen her as a light in that moment. Gwen was using her safety rope to yank panicked pedestrians out of the path of Abomination's attacks, one after another. It wasn't difficult now. She'd gotten the hang of keeping people safe, but a much bigger problem had just arrived. Twisting her body in midair and digging into her core, she flipped so a speeding hovercar skimmed past, brushing the edge of her jacket. She landed on the side of a building, pressed flat so her body was parallel to the wall, and patted her chest where the wind had knocked the breath from her. She'd come within inches of getting clipped. Abomination's attention swung to her. The hulking thing stared up the wall and, grinning with teeth like jagged rocks, snarled, "Little bug, you're the one causing trouble." He crouched, coiled like a spring, and launched himself after her. Gwen's eyes widened. How could something that size jump so high? Does he have springs in his feet? She thought. She kicked off and flipped to another section of the facade, just avoiding his pounce. Abomination planted hands and feet into the concrete as if to anchor himself to the building, then pushed off again, a second leap arcing up toward her. Gwen didn't hesitate. She sprinted along the wall, running across the vertical surface to keep out of reach as the monstrous assault continued. She never believed the Abomination could match her on a building wall. That was her edge. So a surreal sight unfolded over the streets of New York. A young woman sprinting along the face of a skyscraper as if it were level ground, moving faster than people running below. Behind her, a yellowish-brown monster pursued her relentlessly. "This is amazing. Call it Beauty and the Beast." A young man with a camera called out excitedly. He trailed Gwen and the Abomination, filming every second. The terrain didn't slow him. He would occasionally slip out of view and then pop up somewhere else to keep pace with them.